제가 유스 따따님 데라카레스나 마시군도 따님 따 마시군도 따님 공국의 수행지 공마의 수행지 니체 따 마시군도 따님 그거를 까말하시래 수행지 아니 제가왜 제가 쓰는 텐데 잠배 마님나 땅용기 메뉴 송스 다 잠배 마세 마님나 땅용기 말이 쓰는 그 말이 스쳐서 땅용도 좀 그거 쉐빈 버리 이내야 제게 제름도 제게다 아마 좋은 제빈스 까말레실레 아니 마시는 것도 다니고 그 수야데 주제인스
So in the text it says after engaging in the practice of seeing all sentient beings as one's mothers, remembering their kindness, and then cultivating the wish to repay their kindness. So within this context of the practice of seeing sentient beings as mothers and so forth, there are two practices of equanimity. One practice of equanimity is that is done prior to meditations on seeing sentient beings as one's mothers and so forth, by equalizing all sentient beings as, neither being truly or permanently being, friends or enemies and so forth. And then there is the second practice of equanimity that is done before engaging in the practice of exchanging oneself with others, equalizing and exchanging oneself with others. So the first practice of equanimity, the second practice of equanimity refers to the equanimity as it refers to the practice of great love. Love as an equanimity, love as a practice of equanimity in the sense of extending love to all sentient beings without any discrimination. So therefore we understand, there are two occasions to engage in the practice of equanimity, and Kamalashila taught the importance of the first one, saying that we have to engage in the practice of equanimity prior to meditations on seeing sentient beings as one's mothers and so forth. Whereas Changawa Sonam Genjen says that we don't have to engage in that equanimity practice that is done prior to meditations on seeing sentient beings as mothers, because at that stage we have not yet practiced the practice of loving kindness. And Changawa Sonam Genjen's his own view is that without equalizing practice of practicing of love as an equalizing factor, equanimity in the sense of great equanimity of great loving kindness extending to all sentient beings, the prior practice of equanimity cannot be a genuine, authentic practice of equanimity. So Tsongkhapa actually follows the first tradition, the tradition of Kamalashila, and seeing the importance of practicing equanimity right in the beginning.
저는 돌에 근데 신경 배심다 잠배심다 판매심스 다 제도 돌에 신경 배심스도 당연히 제 잠배심 뒤에 순도가 판매심스도 마시도 수준이 어디에서 돌에 그럼 저는 신경 배심 잠배심 판매심스도 어딘지 숨어있어 냠베심스도 당시 잠베심스도 잠바가 어디시 වෙ서 도그 코모트다 딘데 인스다 마시 그런 거 당연히 그래야지.
So even though there are two practices like that, one tradition saying that prior to meditations on seeing sentient beings as one's mothers and so forth, that one has to engage in the practice of equanimity, which is the tradition of Kamalashila, which Tsongkhapa follows. If we look at sutra teachings itself, then the Buddha mentions of three practices in the sutras. So he talks about equalizing mind, mind of loving kindness, and mind of seeing sentient beings as one's mothers and fathers. So in that, in these sutras, according to the sutra, then it is quite clear that equalizing practice or practice of equanimity is taught prior to practices of loving kindness and so forth, which basically is the evidence that is used, that according to Kamalashila tradition, which is the evidence to actually prove that prior to engaging in the practices of seeing sentient beings as mothers, that there's a need to engage in the practice of equanimity.
다 되네. 마시는 것도 줘야 그 타이밍 때려. 냐란도 충분히 좀 당면. 아니 그래서 그래. 다시 그래서 그래. 다시 염지고 그네. 다시 염지기 제주도 생기는 것도 좀 거야기. 당면 때 티지 투명만 배 당 이제 그랬던데 요즘 맹아 지주심이 예, 더 디나라 겹치 제자는 좀 제자 된게 지지도가 어느 좀 뭐지 어디나라 티지 투명만 배당 공주 뒤에서 다시 인간지 공부 돼야 돼.
이제 당시 남직 인간들에게 당연히 자배 당연히 보래. 자배 당연히
다니 장립 다니 말이 단지 때도냐 뒤도 명아지도 존재 등기 마시 공문도 당연히 장이 밤마숨라 니리 차단 갑에 당연 잠이 시제 당연시에 니리 차단 니리 매바 셈냠바르치라 당연시제 냐란도 투무에 당연 기초점이 시제디 다시 냠지는 모두 다시 냠바니 응원도 공도 당연 대전 멤버 심제 탐제라 펜디주바당 동해세에 삼절 눈매바 펜디주도 삼바다 줄와 동해센도 삼바다 줄와 눈매바 생 응원바질라 지지 투명만인데 당연 군주 제발 파바인스디.
So there are the two types of equanimity practice. The first practice of equanimity that is done prior to meditations on seeing all sentient beings as one's mothers. That equanimity practice is actually referred to as the common equanimity practice. That is common to both Mahayana practitioners and as well as Hinayana practitioners. And that practice of equanimity simply refers to the practice of not engaging in discrimination of seeing some sentient beings as close and intimate and some as distant and unrelated, and seeing some as like neutral with kind of without any kind of particular thought and so forth. So the common or the first type of equanimity refers to that equanimity of equanimity of freedom from discrimination. So that is a kind of lower level of equanimity. So the second level of equanimity, or the second type of equanimity, that is practiced prior to engaging in the practice of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others practice. That equanimity refers to equanimity in the sense of having no discrimination with respect to benefiting sentient beings, both mentally and physically, by removing their sufferings and by giving rise to well-being and happiness. So when there is no such discrimination with respect to one's own compassion and loving kindness and how you kind of express that physically, then that type of discrimination, equanimity is the second type of equanimity, which is the Mahayana unique equanimity. It is referred to as the Mahayana uncommon or unique equanimity.
That's 반대티 다시 냠지 응원도 주고 땅인지 아니지 계가와 인사 들려야 주지들 전 군접을 때에 주지 전담을 때에 주지 지체 니 군접을 때에 주지디 향을 때에 주지 숨이야 랑을 때에 주지 숨제 전담을 때에 주지 들려야 주지 숨제 아니 주제 구이거네 아니 팬들 중도 당 아니 동네 센두게 삼주 링둥에 받지 인간받지 주제 볼을 때는 들어있어
So it is said that the second type of equanimity, which is the uncommon Mahayana equanimity, of equanimity in the sense of having no difference or discrimination with respect to both mentally and physically benefiting sentient beings by removing their sufferings and giving rise to their well-being and happiness. That second type of equanimity is actually considered as much more difficult to cultivate. So therefore, with respect to the methods of cultivation of this second type of equanimity, then there are, first of all, two broad types of methods of accomplishment or practices. First is the conventional method to accomplish it, and then the second is the ultimate method of accomplishing it. So with respect to the conventional method, again there are three practices that are used by using oneself as by using others as the reason, and then three practices that are used by using oneself as the basis of accomplishment. So we have 6 conventional methods of accomplishment, and then we have, of course, also 3 methods from the ultimate point of view. So together we have 9 methods of accomplishing the second type of equanimity practice.
That's Marshi did that. Menga doing the Marshi did Marshi did and the Dina like Menga doing Marshi since that and they did it. Tang Marshi Jinjin Siduga just Jinjin delay, Jinjin Menga doing Jinjin the dig up Jinjin you put it. Jinjin Menga doing the good Jinjin Debating connecting the debating Machi Venego Toma Machi Venego Jinjin. Did the data demo Sunga Jinjin is dear round. Oh, the Jinjin Kava use Mashi Jinjin doing another Jinjin data 디가 수시에 진진이 붙지 아니 맛이 그거지 진진 주디 데베팅 디가 수 진진야 들은 데바 마오베 진진 아니 어딘데 인사 이니래 개발이었지
So then in the tradition of seven cause and effects method of accomplishing bodhicitta, there is of course the practice of equanimity, practice of seeing sentient beings as one's mothers, practice of remembering their kindness and so forth. And here in this second tradition of cultivation of bodhicitta, which is equalizing and exchanging oneself with others, again there is also the practice of equanimity, practice of seeing sentient beings as one's mothers, practice of remembering their kindness and so forth. But there are differences with these corresponding practices. So in the tradition of seven cause and effect method, for example, when we engage in the practice of remembering the kindness of other sentient beings, the kindness is with respect to only the kindness that has been done to us by mother sentient beings in the previous lifetimes. So that is only in the past tense, only in the past. But when we engage in the practice of remembering the kindness of mother sentient beings in the tradition of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others, then this kindness is with respect to the kindness in the three times, kindness of sentient beings in the past, in the present, as well as in the future. So therefore there's a difference in this sense.
rangi goshi gunaya semjegi baba tang pule duba tang sejya semjegi shatang omala soba tang ne ji dada rangi yuande da ji kari ne semje shen dade ne go su rangi te tende kende ji ne semje le tene chungu biar ba tin san dade le 진진주지 마오바네 네산 가르스 그래 잠바다 니지다 자주게 셈다 진바다 추진다 안가로 심제를 때니 람지 또바타다 심제를 때니 기구여봐 인사 마오베 진진지 스네 내가 마오베 된주 고반토발에 산 심제를 때니 수tum sung kubeyare, chimbatang kubeyare, sabakung kubeyare. Ne tabata tamji kembe kuban tobale jambata, ninjita janju kusanta. Oke, otinje nyamne che kuwa insane, maungbe tiki tamje simje le tene chunga. Oti jinti, tante, di jinti, 어디 내 마음 생각이 찡찡지지.
So I think I mentioned this a little bit last time, but when we talk about the kindness of mother sentient beings in this time or in the present time, then we have to think about how in this very lifetime how we are dependent on sentient beings. For our clothing, we have to depend on sentient beings' skins and fur and so forth. For food, we depend on milk, eggs, and meat and so forth, again on sentient beings. And also with respect to one's own knowledge and wisdom and so forth, we are dependent on sentient beings, that we our education, our knowledge, our wisdom is possible because of there being other sentient beings. So that is how we remember the kindness of other sentient beings in the present time. And then with respect to the kindness of other sentient beings in the future, then we have to think about how, in order to either take rebirth in higher realms or to achieve the state of liberation and enlightenment, how we are dependent on sentient beings. For example, to take rebirth in higher realms, we have to engage in the practice of observance of morality, practice of generosity, practice of loving kindness, and so forth. And all of these practices and all of these spiritual realizations, because these practices are also spiritual realizations, practice of generosity, and so forth. These are possible because of there being other sentient beings. And then, with respect to the ultimate achievement of liberation and complete enlightenment, we have to engage in the practice of loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta, right view, and so forth. But all of these are again possible because of other sentient beings. So that's how we remember the kindness of other sentient beings with respect to future lifetimes.
Then Debe ten tenju de ngazu debe ten tenju de mai ne me nye na dawa pu dawa chu ma sing ji ne bi ba di nebe mai nye na yebe du shi de chi che ani mai nye na yu de zamba ma di ne se sa da ro da ani ji nye da du su be to ana yebe pu gu di sung ge bi che do se chöba saya me chöba maya ani roda ani nyeda o tindigi tindigi kone jingjiang ju di kum gui chebres mai ne ge ne ge ne ge tene nyane ma jeni ani ame pa na yube ani dushi che la ame pa na yube dushi ani pa man amatigi karasukure ani karasukure jeba di chene pena jeba di chene pe pena jambe tiana shasi somo ji teste shai jole je tsene kare migi ta na keji ya me zama la bechi ya 마랑 소알 파버들이 동네 중에 양 들에 아니 부디 동네 중한테 아니 그래서 그래 메시지 나 근데 소알 파버 동네들 중에 남네도 제네 불라 아니 그래서 그래 딘디게 동네 중에 메시지 쳐지 아니 어딘데 제 장야 지지 아니 마 지지 첨부를 했으나 아니 마기 스카르스고에 지 동에다 디두다 땅에도서 마드바 에 랑기 니제기 노제가 수바 그루제 아니 지 라네야 니고 그랬으래 란페 니제기 이제기 베 노르기고네 펜버도 어다 딘데스제네 딱지야 장전 어두수 장부 유제버리 데베 진주티 아니 딘데데 저 망부바도 제버데 진 교원디도 많이 배워 뭐 진짜 진짜 어다 두수 지다 예심을 수도 있다. 가상이나 지시자.
So then, with respect to remembering the kindness of Mother Sentient beings, with respect to the past times, then of course we have to think about how when we were in the mother's womb for 9 months, how the mother nurtures us with loving kindness and compassion with respect to by eating the right food, always concerned about what kind of food is good or bad for the baby inside, by changing one's way of walking and changing one's way of sleeping so that the baby is protected. Um, and when the mother finally gives birth to the child, then how the mother gazes with loving kindness to the newborn baby, how the mother would clean the baby even by using one's mouth and so forth, so that the baby is not kind of harmed in the process, and to such an extent that in order to ensure that the baby is healthy and safe and happy, that the mother is ready to endure unbearable suffering herself, to the point that even the effort may actually cost her the mother's life, that yet the mother is ready to endure that challenge or that suffering, whatever it may be, so as to protect the baby. And then when the child grows up to be men or women, then how the mother continues to show loving kindness through giving property and so guidance and so forth. So then we have to think about how the mother has done this kind of kindness lifetime after lifetime for thousands, countless number of lifetimes. So this is how we basically think about the kindness of Mother Sentient Beings in the previous lifetimes.
tene mala 그 samchadu tene phala sam phagi mabuji 근데 제야리 sam ran데 단데 만나 신체는 phagi 아니 펜바 채널에 장야리 sam phala tene nyela tene pamala tene 아니 잘라 아니 tene 심제 탐제라 어디 changing cheese the kunjuti tambam sam right mala tiji cheban na shi chi phali ni jewa thama merane jang ma chen tinji jang ya res pama nyen digi jang ya res pama digi jang ya res tando rang cha jing ye digi tin tinje jang ya res jene ata kangalola kong ya de ta
So I have mentioned these meditations earlier, but this is kind of important. This is actually referred to as instructions on remembering the kindness of Mother Sentient Beings. So after you meditate in these ways with respect to one's own mother in this lifetime, then you meditate in these ways with respect to one's own father in this lifetime by visualizing the father, using your father as the focus, and then meditating that your father has been your mother in countless lifetimes, and so that your father is also kind like your mother in all that respect. Then after that, then you meditate on your family members and close friends and relatives, and then also seeing how your relatives also have been your mothers countless number of lifetimes, and in that sense they are also equally kind in all these ways. Then you use your enemy as your focus of your meditation, and then you apply the same logic that your enemy has been your mother for countless number of lifetimes, and so therefore your enemy is also, even though kind of enemy in this lifetime, but your also enemy is has because of your has having been your mother for many countless lives is equally kind to you. And after this, then you extend this meditation to all sentient beings by seeing how all sentient beings have been your mothers for countless number of lifetimes, and how therefore they are equally kind in that sense.
다 때문에 진수 시도 잠바 다 고온도 진기 잠바 되겠지 로레 야르바 제산에 진진기 맞대나니 동해 담제다 저와지다 대와 담제든 듯이 자오는 버렸들라 아니 진수기 진수티 있어요 진수
So then, of course, the practice of repaying the kindness of other sentient beings is to give rise to the thought, after going through the meditations on how they have been kind in many ways, the giving rise to the thought of repaying their kindness is simply the practice of repaying the kindness of other sentient beings.
어디 디숨 마시 근데 내가 중게 급수 마시 진지 진수숨 삼발을 때는 영기 잠바스 영어 잠바스한테 배 통화장기 이도 제시판가 이도 뭐 매번 이도 어딘지 영기 잠바 주단들에 니 다신염지 군의 영기 잠바 주다 준제 내가 중기 군의 영기 잠바 주다 니 전에 다시 준대 명가 뒤고는 영국 장 주단디다 디리 마시 진지 진수숨 야부 주정수나 심제디 통화 점집에 가나나 제시 방법이 배 로직이야래 어디 전에 영국 장 봐서야래 영국 장 봐서 다 다시 염지 그거는 영국 장 밖에 돼 현지 신 라진지기 준 고도만에 삼바 신진지기 인데 고도만에 삼바들이 아니 삼바를 때는 영국 잠바도스 다 단대디 내가 네가 주변에서 영국 잠바디 네가 그인거야 다시 양지 준대면 그래서 마시 진지 전수문도 수문도 다 되네 라진지기 인데서 견상 현진지기 인데서 뒤뒤수 영웅비 장바기에 다들 영웅비 장바기에 주제니가 청계야 됐을 텐데 그때 근데 다시 년지 군에 전주 생기 주들가 년도
So then with respect to the first edition of cultivation of Bodhicitta, the seven cause and effect method tradition, after meditating on seeing sentient beings as one's mothers, and then practices on remembering their kindness, and then the third practice of generating the thought to repay their kindness, then these three practices give rise to the fourth practice, which is referred to as love or loving kindness, loving fondness, Yewon Chamba. And that loving kindness realization or the mind of love refers to the generation of a great sense of intimacy. Whenever you see any sentient being, there is a real sense of intimacy, inner joy, and you see all of the sentient beings as precious and a source of joy. And when that ever happens, then you have given rise to the fourth practice or fourth realization, which is love or loving kindness. In the tradition of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others, loving fondness or loving kindness, yongchamba, is generated by reflecting on the faults or disadvantages of self-cherishing and meditating on the advantages or qualities of cherishing of others. And once you have meditated on these, then these meditations give rise to loving kindness. But now, loving kindness in this tradition is induced or generated by both the traditions, because we are mingling or mixing the two traditions of bodhicitta. So the loving kindness experience becomes very powerful because it is generated, first of all, on the first tradition of bodhicitta, seeing sentient beings as one mothers, remembering their kindness and generating the intent to repay their kindness, and also generated by reflecting on the advantages of cherishing of others and disadvantages of self-cherishing.
Mati telam na marhi jinji jinsu sumundu tane dashin yamji gonggu sumba ni le dambu wala chari tewe dela gongni sumba yinbe dedar gonggu stati da mati telam la marhi jinji jinsu sumundu tane ane dashin yamji jinju simki tante sunyati ane le dambu we ondu jebares le dambu wala 마시 진지지 수수무도 간테네 다신냠지 군의 전주고 심 로정비나 아니 차르제와야리스 디나 시제네 숨바리스.
So in the easy path tradition, it is taught in such a way that first of all, one meditate on seeing sentient beings as one's mothers, then remembering their kindness meditations, then repaying the kindness of mothers, sentient beings meditation. Then after that, then one is taught to engage in the practice of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others. And this is taught for beginners because it is easier that way. It is more convenient and easier to engage in equalizing and exchanging oneself with others practice if you have the first three foundations of seeing sentient beings as one's mothers and so forth. So that's why in this tradition it is taught in this particular tradition because it is easier for beginners.
Then lamri chimu ta lamri jing kapsu tende yamari mashi tende menga tingkune sem jungju nondu tan tene di jela dashinyamji jukune jenju sem kiyati di negapsu mashi tende tinsu lan yamari bebe yesa lamri chinjing tang chinjing na dedar mebati duja onu ondu jeba yins lamri chemo tang lamri jingi kapsu delang na shi jeni junte dashinyamji kone jenju ge sem ki ju sheba di chene ya ma she jingji jing su lang je sung du ga dina shi mebare di mebati ka re sene onu ondu jeba yins.
So in this tradition, Dalam, the easy path tradition, it is taught in such a way that to engage in the practice of generating bodhicitta by following the or by using the tradition of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others, Dakshin Nyamje, that Dakshin Nyamje practice is done by first of all engaging in the practices of seeing sentient beings as one's mothers, meditation, then meditating on remembering their kindness, and then meditating on obeying their kindness from other sentient beings. That is because it is used. This particular tradition is used for beginners because it is easiest that way. But if you look at other traditions of generating bodhicitta in other instructions, like in the great treatises on the path of enlightenment, Lamrim Chenmo, or the middling length path of stages of the path, Lamrim Ding. If you look at these, then what you find in these texts is that first of all, one meditates on the first tradition of cultivating bodhicitta, that is equalizing oneself, that is 7 cause and effect method tradition. And then when you meditate on the second tradition of bodhicitta, that is equalizing and exchanging oneself with others, we start by meditating on the disadvantages of self-cherishing right away, without meditating on seeing one's sentient beings as seeing one's mothers and so forth. And that is because these traditions are taught for those of higher mental capacity. For practitioners of higher mental capacity, when you engage in the practice of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others, we don't have to again meditate on seeing sentient beings, one's mothers, and so forth. So generally speaking, though, when we talk about the second method of generating bodhicitta, that is equalizing and exchanging oneself with others, this tradition of bodhicitta generation is recommended only for beings of higher mental capacity. Why it is recommended for beings of higher mental capacity? Because the methods that are used to give rise to this bodhicitta through this tradition are methods that require higher mental capacity. The conventional method that is used and an ultimate method that is used. So from a conventional point of view, in order to give rise to bodhicitta in this particular technique of equalizing oneself with others, conventionally one has to be able to take upon oneself the suffering of all sentient beings and give one's own well-being and happiness to other sentient beings. So from a conventional perspective, it requires higher mental capacity in that sense. And then from an ultimate point of view, it also requires higher mental capacity, because from an ultimate point of view, in order to engage in the practice of this technique of giving rise to bodhicitta, one has to, from an ultimate point of view, see the selflessness or the lack of inherent existence or the emptiness of both oneself and other sentient beings. So that's why it requires higher mental capacity.
menga dealing scenes been the open with them duty 다신염지 menga 다신염지 부분에 전주의 심 지역이 인시디 그래서 우리 공지 되네 대시시 방향의 신의 계도 좀 구충돼 당기 되네 대시시 봐 장배도 개부 장배도 충배치 누지 붕알라 이게 차기 침벌제배 제바다 개부 신의 침배 세수 충배치 다무라 류진가서 다디 디다신염지 주군의 전주의 생기배 쿵티임버리 좀 쿵티
대시시와 싱다 좀 무슨 싱다
신의 전배 인연의 신의 전배 개 구충배 당기지
So then the historical context or historical evidences to show that bodhicitta can be generated in this way, bodhicitta can be generated by following the technique of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others. To prove this, then these accounts or historical accounts are usually mentioned. The first is there is the story of there's a story about a particular girl who generated bodhicitta, and the Tibetan name for her is Zawu Pumo, but I have to seek clarification. Maybe Ramesh is going to explain on this again. I don't know. And then there's also the history of how Shakyamuni Buddha, when he was born in the hell realm as a horse to pull a chariot, at that particular instance, how he gave rise to bodhicitta is in this particular tradition or technique. And then there's also a tradition of how 겨우 참배도 디 상기를 how Shakyamuni Buddha, when he was a bodhisattva, as bodhisattva named Chambe Top, which translates as power of love, that how he gave his own blood to 4 yakshas, for like demons, right? And there's also, of course, the story of the Shakyamuni Buddha when he was born as a prince, how he gave his own body to the hungry tigress with the calves, right? So these historical contexts of the Bodhisattva's lifetimes are basically used as examples of how it is possible to give rise to bodhicitta by following the tradition of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others.
다티네 동네 공주디 자우밤을 당기지 가산디 슈자리인데 슈자리 근데 내가 신데 좀 이렇게 고충도 뒤에 슈자리 다티네 단데디 제가 동네 공주디다 다신염비 분에 전주그 셈 기주들이 임바 다신염 바제 디카산 람마치베 시티 슈베임바 다신염 바세티 다신염 바제 아니 라진지기 고토만에 라진지기 고토만에 삼바스 시진지기인데 고토만에 삼바스 아니 다시 다시 저와 네. 등이 롱을 빈데 대 동네 공주스. 제어디 나이가 나디 그선에 라마치베 치신디 전에 슈처르데. 대에서다 동네 공주들라. 슈윙스. 되게 그선 슈처르스.
So all of these historical accounts of Bodhisattva's lifetimes I've mentioned before. I've told the story of these particular historical instances before. Then, in terms of the actual sequence of generation of bodhicitta, through this technique of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others, there are 5 distinct stages, which also I mentioned, taught last time. First is the practice of Dakshen Nyamba, which is equalizing oneself, equalizing oneself with others. The second is the practice of meditating on the disadvantages or faults of self-cherishing based on various different reasons. Then the third is seeing the advantage or qualities of cherishing others based on, again, various reasons. Then the fourth is the actual exchanging practice, exchanging oneself with others, the actual practice of exchanging oneself with others. And then the fifth is the practice of tonglen, or giving and taking, as an enhancement practice. So I've taught on all of these points before by using, verses from Guru Puja, Lama Choba, by using verses for corresponding verses from Guru Yoga practices, Lama Choba. I've actually mentioned all of these 5 distinct practices, but I'm going to now explain a little more on the practice of giving and taking, or tonglen practice.
다때는 동네들 semba chimbo 홀든베 홀든 받쟁아 로주 견제기 동안은제 렘바 제수지 아니 제세림도치 렘바은제 동아 제수 탐제 캠바 긴두주베잖아 렘바은제 동아 제수 라랭기체 다 라마치바나시 Tena jidu lama tochi je manju tuwe titi tuni ku malu tata tala mimba tanga situ lemba ngole che barba tagi tegi shala tama yisi tonga chele che barba wati re yisi che. So in terms of the sugans, when we engage in the practice of giving and taking, should we engage in the practice of giving first and then taking, or should we engage in the practice of taking first and then engage in the practice of giving? According to Hordun Jenga Lodo Genzen, Hordun Ba Jenga Lodo Genzen, or Jenga, he actually taught that we should engage in the practice of giving first, followed by taking. But other masters like Geshe Rinpoche, Jigidun Gyatso, Jigidun Duba, the first Dalai Lama. They, Geshe Rinpoche and Jigidun Duba, and these masters actually taught that we should engage in the practice of taking first, followed by giving. But in actual practice, that is actually obvious in Lama Choba or Guru Puja by Panji Losang Genze. In actual practice, then we engage in the practice of taking first, taking upon oneself the suffering of the sentient beings, followed by giving. That's 동네 니부디 뒤치도 제베 네버네스. 근데 다 동아디 단대디 동아 뒤치도 제버바. 그나 담보치에 생기 동네다 니모다 동네 탐제라라. 랑기 때지 탐제 파다스는 동네 니부디 뒤치도 제버바. 내가 뒤치 뒤치에 네버 메스 또 공부 코나 전에 배는 가르쳐 그래 또 공부 코나 좀 제바스 또 안세는다 잠배 미 버째 네 잠보 공부에 내버리는 또 이제지 랑기 되게 탐제 유도가 탐제파 땅야 미 버째지 아니 땅에 대화된 템바 대외 교단 대화된 대외 교단 템바 제소 삼바르 버째 되게 다가 장자지 야 이미지 공부에 내가서 신기 동에 탐제라는 라르지 강에 체인도 신기 동에 탐제 랑기 강에 뒤된 출라 신 강에 탐제도 제와 제소 삼바르지 야 렘바 주 제니 제상 동행이부터 뒤지도 제고 내버려 제상 잠바 공배 내고 수동아 조제 동안 견자고 야 인지 공배 내고 수 렘바 견자제 렘바 조제 어두스 공에 야리스
So also because the Tonglen practice is enhancement practice, enhancing the practice of one's compassion and loving kindness. In actual practice, it is not necessarily the case that we engage in the practice of Tonglen or giving and taking in one meditation circle or in one meditation session, that we engage in both of these simultaneously. Usually what we do is we do them together in such a way that we first of all talk upon oneself, the suffering and negative emotions of other sentient beings. Then after that practice, which is the practice of compassion, then we engage in the practice of giving one's own well-being and happiness and realizations to other sentient beings, which is the practice of love or loving kindness. We do it together like that in one sitting meditation. But this is not necessarily the case. In actual practice, you can focus on compassion, predominantly focus on compassion, at one time, where then you focus on taking upon oneself suffering of other sentient beings and negative emotions of suffering sentient beings. You don't necessarily have to engage in the practice of giving, but sometimes then you wanted to focus on simply the practice of love or loving kindness. And then at those times, then you engage in the practice of giving. Predominantly, you visualize giving to sentient beings, your happiness and your realizations like that. So therefore, they can also be practiced separately when you either focus on the loving kindness or compassion.
야, 다때는 답변은 렘바랍지 공급 다 동행이긴 하네 렘바랍지 또 지금 제백급수 근데스 쪽으로 해서는 주제디 된도삼 주제 가리네 답변은 영어랍지 냐외 동에네 주 렘바 점비는 냐외 동에 나외 심제디 랑그 된도 이거랍지 삼 아니 나외 동에디 나주 삼 담보 네 나주 삼네 되네 나주 삼 되네 렘바 고점바나 간렌전이 다디 나주 삼 되네 레야디 가르레스는 신기 동에 신기기 아니 동에다 되네 동에기 군중 어디로 딘데상 레야디디 동에다 동에기 군중 선주 동에다 동에기 주다 teori 주지 시에바 디안 레야디 동에 동에기 군중 제 레야디 다티네 다 동에지 동야디 가르선 심젤미베 동야디 가르선은 대화 당국이라 이 대외 풍배 심제디 준두상 야 동네 대외 풍주상 대화 매주디상 아니 동화를 주고 봐. 다 동야지 가래서는 랑기 유지, 주지, 계좌지, 송부터리스.
So when we engage in the practice of taking, then we visualize sentient being or the sentient beings from whom we are going to take their sufferings. And so it could be sentient beings in the hell realm or a sentient being in the hell realm. And then before taking that, what we are taking their suffering and the causes of suffering. So therefore we visualize a particular sentient being in a particular hell realm or sentient beings in the hell realms. And then you visualize their suffering vividly and the causes of their suffering. And then you take upon yourself the sufferings and the causes of suffering. Likewise, when you engage in the practice of giving, we have to visualize a sentient being in front of ourselves, sentient beings, because in order to give, we have to see them as being deprived of well-being and happiness. So therefore, for the practice of giving, we have to see how this particular sentient beings or these particular sentient beings are deprived or lack well-being and happiness. And then you give them three things. When we are giving our body, when we are giving our wealth, and we are giving collection of virtuous karma that we have. We are giving these three things to sentient beings who are deprived of well-being and happiness.
Condition Chiguris Penata Aranju whatever Ralakanga condition ran Nazar Chitan Nasune, Yan Nazar member can condition can it ever teach in a can it Rangi can it eat into same time, Jiki can it need Nazar eat into Chula. Chulang simje tamje ne kange te ta teori puchi nyambe malum jo oti ena rala kange chi te bati chena tanda nazarab chi je bena rala nazarab chi chungsuna ti nazati semma shumje ma te bache yarangi shuni tene ta Chignaza ki kanga se tuk meri imbriti mashum beche tindik lotop jena nazale semle kanga mataya ki keba yubri semle kanga mataya ne cho mabu saya ta tingi sana naza di shumne mate beche naza di rangi nuki leiki yin sambar mendu beche ya me sambar beche ane ngagi naza tindik juya 강에 등하잖아요. 선제 탐제가 강에 빠지면 야리 상. 아주고 말이상. 네 선제 빠지면 강에 등한제 내나지 뒤에도 나네. 나네 선제 탐제 강에 되다 저거 최소. 저거 쇼냐. 저거 주지냐. 근데 만남 답이야지. 다 뒤에 가서 그래. 렘바스.
So then in practical terms, when you actually take upon yourself the suffering of sentient beings, is when you actually suffer from some sort of physical sickness or some, even though it's not physical sickness, some sort of mental suffering. When you suffer from such physical or mental sufferings, then those are the times then you engage in the practice of taking. Those are the times that we shouldn't be discouraged, or we shouldn't lose hope or be depressed, because feeling discouraged or losing hope or being depressed actually does not help the physical or mental suffering. But they become, if we use it properly, they become a causal factor that can activate the accumulation of extensive merit. So therefore, instead of feeling discouraged whenever you have some sort of physical suffering or mental suffering, then you visually take upon yourself the suffering of sentient beings and pray in this way that through virtue of my physical or mental suffering and through visually taking upon myself the suffering of sentient beings, may no sentient beings suffer in this way. May sentient beings be freed of such sufferings. So when you engage in such powerful prayers, then that becomes a causal factor. Your suffering becomes a causal factor for great accumulation of merit.
That didn't good. Don't ji got the originals, you do all the minute, the child give it is. You do all the minute, and the judge of beginning, young and mumble take it. Teacher, Dash into Rani, Rash into you do all the minute, the judge give a simple mumble yaris, the judge gang actually. The jiggy, the janum, Sangilene, Suzuki Denton. Doja di tentu nene. Ne semje tamje doja me batu temba gyuchi nyamba. Ne semje namgi gyugi doja gyudan cheba randi tunene sijesa di chena. Semje tamje gi doja gyuda cheba di randi semje tentu ne. Ani rangi gi chigi nene ani semje tamje be deja good jeb the tower some any chi rangi gi in deja me be kewala suba kewal khata that audit is bena deja rab chikabu gene kange chebati chena samtin je tambi na tan tikarasu deja Jawadi, Chula Jartubi, Chus, Semba Sambugi, Semba Sambuchi Jumara, Semba Sambuchi, Yamechi Jumara, the Jagiva Latene, who Semba Sambuchi, Yamechi Jumara, what did you answer? Chula, the Jadi Chula, you to the what is what that dinner she died again, Hondu Genenda, Yamushi Genenda, what to something that I think.
And this applies to not just like when you're suffering, but when you're in the sense of physical suffering, but when you also have mental sufferings because of being tormented by negative emotions of intense desire, hatred, and ignorance, and other such negative emotions. For example, on seeing a beautiful or pleasant form that we may give rise to intense desire and then be tormented by intense desire. Desire becomes a source of great mental suffering. When that happens, then it can be turned into an occasion for practice of Tonglen by visually, when you suffer because of desire, that you take upon yourself the desire and the causes of desire in other sentient beings upon yourself, and then visualize and pray that sentient beings be freed of their suffering because of desire and causes of desire. And likewise, so therefore, occasions when negative emotions are generated becomes a factor for engaging in the practice of virtue, engaging in the practice of Dharma, becomes a practice for accumulation of merit. So this particular practice can be applied to occasions when other negative emotions are generated, like hatred, jealousy, and so forth.
That teacher, didn't that in it, Journal Condition, 저는 탐제도 배 잠바도 민지기 삼바 중요하디다 저는 좋아이네다 두배이네다 내 잠바도 민지 민남 중요하디 게 전부 시부대 있어요 다 단데디 민지 미버 덤버리 심야랑 강에 저디 이제 신의 분야선 영어바 샤레 차베군이나 차봉원도 중에 동네 강에 차봉원도 있어 그 강에 차베 강에도 서랑기 강에 때도 추이랑 제디 민지 미버제 좀 버리 민지 공부해 어디 그나 신전에 라면 저는 간대지네 참대 추이래야 아니 참대 파다야 랑기 저는 간대지네 대화지 좀 강에 지체선을 추이래야 야 대화를 붙이 중수나 야 디기를 붙이 간대 중수네야 파다야 어디서 저는 탐제도 배 장구레스
Then we should train so that in all conducts or at all occasions that we are training in the practice of giving and taking. We are training, therefore, in the practice of enhancement of compassion and loving kindness. Right now, when we engage in the practice of visually taking upon oneself desire and causes of desire, we are engaging in the practice of taking, and which is basically a practice of generation of compassion. But at all occasions or in all conducts, whether we are sitting or walking or sleeping, that we should, in all of these occasions and in all our physical conducts, that we should always engage in the practice of training in giving and taking. So in such a way that whenever we experience some sort of suffering, use that occasion to take upon yourself the suffering of sentient beings. Or when we experience joy and moments of happiness, use that occasion right away to give well-being and happiness to sentient beings.
다 조천부양 시민배 두담 최대당 시민배 아마 시민배기 두담 그때 최대치 이제 이게 우투 예촌나 예바다스 우투데 예촌에 아니 자주 비sem기 미투초디 시당기는디 在罗马夜里吧，加上建筑个生活的确相当的路的也能那个颜色，你看的是个教几个我的这是也能确定这个，第一点的看建筑个生活的确个相当的。 이 초시야가 예 초시여서 디기 냠네 전주 생긴 냠네 난디여다 그래서 그래 디 시당 준비치다 그 저는 순전히 딘딘는 디여가 저는 순전히 어디 그 중세 예수여버디 디가 시당이 전주 생긴 미주 초시당제 디 시당 그자디 로마들이 디 라니 라예네 여봐 어때 디에서 딘디비 저는 중전에 딘디는 여봐 어디나 시제라 저는 탐제도 제주부 심패 남의 지구에 있어요.
So just an example of how we should use all occasions and all moments of conduct to engage in the practice of bodhicitta is how Mother Adisha, it is said that because the obstacle which gives because the anger, which is basically which acts as the obstacle to give rise to bodhicitta, because anger uh, and the when the wind that stirs the negative emotion of anger predominantly resides in the right channel. The wind inside the right channel activates the negative emotion of anger, and in order to meditate through conduct, the suppression of anger, which becomes the factor that prevents the cultivation of bodhicitta. It is said that Adisha always had his head tilted little towards the right. So wherever he goes, and whenever he was giving teachings, his head is tilted little towards the right, symbolizing the suppression of anger, which becomes the factor that prevents bodhicitta, right? So even through such physical conduct, Adisha utilized those conducts to give rise to bodhicitta.
디두치 중요하다. 남도 치고 빼나 타지 변지기 주부 로자와야 디송비임래. 로자와 기부 중은 도부마 중은 송비임래 봐. 아니 로자와 기부 중은 도부마 중 시베인스. 티네 변지기 기나 때와 초송스 펜데당가 강화쇼스 도나 군기 등의 쿨 동의 자주 견바쇼스 어다 아니 기부 주나 아니 니께와 초송어 우리스 아니 펜데당가 강화쇼 뭐사디 나게 타장에 bessim제 탐제를 뭐 그래 뭐 이제 정말 아니 펜데당가 강화쇼스 아 도나 군기 등의 쿨 동네 주나 아니 기분 맞주나 군기 동네들랑 동네들랑네 아니 동네 쿨들랑네 동네 자주 겸바쇼 생제 탐지기 동네 자주 디겸바쇼 아니 만남 되게 예순거지
It is said that Master Kaji Penjin, Kaji Pandita, or when he met Thukpo Lotsawa, he Tibetan translator Thukpo Lotsawa, then Kaji Penjin asked Thukpo Lotsawa, how have you been, basically, did you were you happy? Did you suffer? And then it is said that Thukpo Lotsawa said, I was happy, I didn't have any suffering. And to that, Kaji Penjin responded by saying that whenever you have happiness, when you experience happiness, then you should dedicate your happiness to all sentient beings, and then pray that well-being and happiness extend or pervades the extent of space, and that when you suffer, then you should take upon yourself the suffering of sentient beings, and then pray that the suffering of ocean be dried because of that.
사다 베츠네세데 라자 칼라신부치 사바르비치네 라자남키 세 로신부터 롱주베치스 롤라 세베 삼바파네 디다베 롱주주 중아디네 상계다 상계기 거진다 로아 승제기 거진이 상부지 거진인베 다그 혼내 노주반 메자버 이 준비 교와 타다 재산 교와 랑기 셀러 노주야기 교와 지로 교와 당 제부 세례랑 줘야 이 준비 개와타다 좋았으면 탐지 틈도 longe 대달이 주요라 사미기 두지를 챙겨 주지면 초송을 왔다 초송을 라는 디기지 중에서는 때는 칼라시 무지서도 아니 지금 셀을 잡아내야지 이 상계단 아니 심지 거진의 때는 칼라리 신부지를 세주 중에 예상하지 아니 딘제 칼라리 진부서야 그때 개발지다 딘제 칼라 신부 딘제 나주야디 심지 탐제를 용하시오스 심지 탐제를 투모도 나주었대 제네는 심지 탐제 유주를 사미기 두지로라 심바쇼 디게와 자와들 때는 심지 탐제 사미기 두지로라 농주베 주주용 쇼 스타만am 제 어디 만남제는 초수모세야 되지
So, how do you dedicate your happiness to to all sentient beings? For example, when you eat food, and when you eat food and the food is tasty, instead of actually generating craving to the taste of the food, that we should reflect that the fact that one is able to enjoy this tasty food is because of the kindness of enlightened beings and because of the kindness of sentient beings. And then because of that, you dedicate that then that you pray and dedicate that may all sentient beings have occasions or opportunities to engage in enjoying such tasty food, and then dedicate that by virtue of your prayers that eventually then may all sentient beings actually experience the taste of uncontaminated nectar, like that. So this is how you dedicate.
다트네 도나 kunji do나 스타타 동네 중에서는야 만들어 내버지 지 레 나기레 내베제부 인사 민수 삼버지제 아니 대장도 마세 로아 kunji 동네 등에 뒤그 주베쇼 제 아니 로아 탐제 뒤기 동네 자주 뒤게 버쇼 자주 동네 세버쇼 아디 동네 자주 캠프 쇼시에티 따지서 말은 게 어디 지구요리다 나를 동네 강에 지체서는 항상 강에 뒤기 심제 탐지 그 강에 심제 탐지 그 강에 여거지 이 강에 타다 내뒤 그 전에 심제 탐지니 강에 전에 동네 자주 되게 좋아쇼스 madam, what are the chances of nature to get that is cheating
So likewise, when Hajj asked him to pray that whenever you suffer, that you take on yourself the suffering of sentient beings, and then through that way you pray that the ocean of sufferings be dried. Is whenever you come across with any kind of suffering, mental or physical, first of all, you engage in the practice of acceptance of suffering because of the fact that it is ripening of your own karma, and then utilize that opportunity to take upon yourself the suffering of other sentient beings by praying that through this suffering of mine may I be able to take upon myself the suffering of sentient beings, and through this you then dedicate that the ocean of suffering be dried. Very similar way by saying that the three objects of refuge, the meditational deity, and the sentient beings, these five things are my. I always consider these five things to be my guru and my meditation lady.
Tene gombolo tu ta baze chung shiben dole chung semje guche gor che chus che bas le chungas. Lu tu tina chu chang sha ti baze chung shi che dole semje gor che chus che bas tinde yo tu ba ti chus che ba le ti pyang sha ti. Chungma namda buddha onju jese chimbudam shanam dani chada sida luinam dani mi ganam kona gawe onji ngayi dama des gangshi dela chena dini ngala nöbe semje namla choto pena ngala chojo ins semje namla nöbe choni ngala nöjo ins ngada semje namni deda dungi chungbar döbe kanshi semje nöje dini ngala jidarme oda 디 산지기 충만 응 아니 계속이 제베 거스 충만 남도 보다 온주다 아니 계속이 수고지 남다 아니 샤남다니 차다 지다 루남 다니 믹 제베 강남 코나 가외 온지 나이 땅어디 심제남 땅이 스케레 대다 가외치도 땅이 강시기 대라 체나 심제남의 체나 강시기 심제남의 체나 되는 알아 너빈스 심제를 좋아하는 알아 너빈스 심제남의 초도 패는 알아 최조인스 semje nala ta pemba chena ngala chube choyins semje nala nebe choni ngala no choyins semje nala kete nebe chesun ti ti ngala nebe yins ngata semje tani deda tunge chumbar tebes dewan deba ta tunge menduba chumbar teba yinsas kanshi semje meji tini ngala chedar menyos
And also Nagarjuna quotes from a particular sudra, and in that particular sudra there's a segment of verses referred to as verses to please sentient beings, to venerate sentient beings. And there the Buddha said that when I, while training as a bodhisattva, when I have offered or given up my own wives, sometimes my children, and I've also given up my flesh and blood, and as well as my eyes and so forth, in order to serve, please, and sentient beings. Then, if someone, and since because of that, if someone harms sentient beings, that amounts to also harming me. If someone helps sentient beings and worships in that sense sentient beings, that also amounts to venerating me. So that's what. So therefore, how can someone who engages in the act of harming sentient beings claim to have devotion or veneration towards me? So this is what the Buddha said in that particular sudra.
제사 심제나를 삼바 삼부제 그것은 동네로 소버제니 심제기 강에 무엇을 렌투거든 무엇을 강에 세투거든 무엇을 대어투거든 이게 좀 다 초도 좀 봐라 이땐 이 마주네 랑기 셈기 나 두수기 가르수에 랑기 셈기 심제기 강에 출대야다 랑기 대화라서 파당야 두수 가르수에 지기나 아니 심제기 장단이 왜 초쪽이야 봐 초자 좀 무슨 아니 상계기 추배 초도 그거지 이 상계기 송송아 말을 추조인스 대달 추버지나 말을 추조인 말을 대달 내버지는 말을 내조인스 어디에서 이 장바된 민주 공부해야 돼 저어디 두개야
So therefore, if it is possible, and if we were able to actually benefit sentient beings in such a way that we are able to eliminate their suffering and give rise to well-being and happiness, then that is well and good, extremely good. But even if we can't actually do so, the importance of doing it mentally taking upon oneself the suffering of sentient beings, and mentally dedicating one's virtue and well-being to other sentient beings through the Tonglen practice is extremely important, because then through these visual or mental practices, it can actually enhance our loving kindness and compassion.
Yeah, that is 따도 그래서 그래. 다시 따 돈에 수업에다 공부했잖아. 생기는 수고미야다. 아니 지기 장야. 따도 배 이제 공부를 좀 듣는 순간다. 다라 대다 대민지. 다기 말이 되는 인쇼스 어딘데기 치도수 도야 치기람네 다바리스도스 도야 야 준줄레 도에 동에 가지 디고 달라 민주식스 자주 심배 긴두기 로에 때나 그거 쇼스 뭐 제제 아니 라마 주변에 여러분 때나 지존 라마 도제제 만주도에 뒤에 듣는 그 말도 다다다는 거 다디 되기신 또 이스 어디 된지 남주 치기 전에 치도스 되네 저는 군도 치기 장세 뒤에 저는 탐제도 치도스 되네 아니 something things what did you raise here
So it is said that in terms of engaging in Tonglen practice, that we should do so through engaging in actual meditations, or if we are not able to sit in meditation, then train in this particular practice through reciting verses or lines that basically instruct us to engage in this practice, that inspires us to contemplate on this particular practice. Lines from, for example, Nagarjuna, where Nagarjuna prays that may the karmic fruition of sentient beings actually ripe upon myself, and may my well-being and happiness spread to other sentient beings. Or likewise, Shantideva's like famous line where it says, "Whatever sufferings sentient beings may have, may I be able to actually experience them." Or from the Guru Puja verses, that there's a particular verse where it says, "Therefore, you know, my root precious Guru, may the suffering of all sentient beings ripen upon myself, and through dedicating my virtue and well-being to other sentient beings, may they achieve the bliss of well-being and happiness." So through such lines, even if we are not actually able to engage in meditation, through reciting such lines, we should constantly remind ourselves of bodhicitta practice, of Tonglen practice.
That Tonglen Jitu Ninjita Jambe Mipet, Tonglen Jitu Zambata, Ninjita Jamba Kungiari. Thing is, Ninji Kundu Kendechubra Sina Toma Rangi Matawi Yidu Gang Yidu Gang Yila Jabashini Tambo Rangi Matawi Yutuche. Dine Matila Sami Tawa Sanamindu Sami Tawa Sayati Tabetawa Nandu Congress Tabetawa Yamarva never Masani Saji Tawa Ranzu Sesam Nedoki Tawa Timbitin the Yerbatilla Saji is so Tawasi. Dia Nipe Karasuri Saji Tawaya Kumbu. Ani Saji Tawa Lumbare, Tawa Zingia, the Negative Shirovich. Dia Saji Tawa Kumbarvich. Doing that. Any Saji Tawa doing Bebe Tungduchene Jagas Pay. Aranju Tewan doing it, Tewa Den, Pepe Juka, the Katish Jagachine, Chimane Sungi Puchi. Cindy Young Nashi to base. Any the Aranju Petuchi at the Yati Tewachim Den, Petuchi Yerba, Lady Petuchi at the Pech or Chimane Sungi Kurvich. And it's centrally based on Jibati Nashi to us. Based on Jibakang Mambuchite. They were doing it, Jibet Chimbuche into Kang Mambuchite. Said the Kang Mambuteva Masani, Chimang Yasun to us. There's a end of the dots on them into some. And they need to do it, the other the way to that energy maroons. Devata Devi Judantan by Gurchis. Devata Devi Judantan by Tagicho. What that did it something? Amateur Kuni, Ticum Sasuna, Nepala. Ticum Sasuna, Ninje. The Nepal messenger, the net data. Jeba, the net simja Tamjela. Kuni, That's Jambeti, Jambeti. What did Jambo come to the yes?
So, in terms of meditation on love, loving kindness, and after meditation on loving kindness, then you engage in Tonglen practice to enhance it. So, in terms of the focus with respect to contemplation or meditation on love, first of all, you visualize your own mother of this lifetime, and then contemplate or think how she is deprived of uncontaminated uh, bliss and happiness. Uncontaminated in the sense of well-being and happiness, or bliss or happiness of liberation and enlightenment. And then also you think on how he is deprived of even contaminated happiness. Contaminated happiness, how rare it is for her to actually experience contaminated happiness, let alone uncontaminated happiness. And if we look at what contaminated happiness, happiness that is produced by karmic, good karmic causes and actions in a momentary sense, that even such happiness, even though they are very rare to find, they are nonetheless product of many hardships. To give rise to contaminated happiness, one has to go through extreme hardships, in fact. And so there is, first of all, the difficulty of going through extreme hardships to experience happiness that is nonetheless contaminated anyways. And then those hardships, the actions that we engage in to achieve contaminated actions, usually are negative by nature, and so therefore they become a causal factor for giving rise to lower realms in the next lifetime. So therefore we should contemplate how your mother, your own very mother of this lifetime, suffers from such extreme suffering. And then after contemplating how she is deprived of all of these well-being and happiness and bliss, then generate this thought of that says, how I wish that my mother have happiness and causes happiness. How I wish my own mother have both contaminated and contaminated happiness and causes happiness. And then you intensify that and pray that may she enjoy both uncontaminated and contaminated happiness and the causes of those happiness. And then you make a dedication that says, in fact, I am going to ensure and I'm going to take personal responsibility so that my mother has, or my mother enjoys both contaminated and uncontaminated happiness. So this is your practice of love, chamba, or loving kindness, as opposed to compassion. And after visualizing and focusing on your mother, on your mother like this, and then you change your focus to your father of this lifetime, then change your focus to your relatives, then change your focus to neutral beings, and then change your focus to enemies in this lifetime, and then focus and extend it to all sentient beings. So this is the instructions of how to engage in the practice of contemplating on love or loving kindness.
다들 니지 거바디 있으면 니지 로 장어디 있으면 정말 아니 두네 지름네 제배는 영화도 야 미유나 지둥네 잡은 용대가 내 잡은 용대가 이제 미유체 하나님 영원에 아니 녀의 동네지 녀지 이다지 또 수다 동네 동네기 시다 날 때문에 미슈도 되게 그거 야말 동네 안자매가 나한테 열봐 디데지 유도제 아니 이 유도제네 이게 동네기 나주디 있지 아니 나주디 되네 동네다 동네기 주다 저 주지 냐바지 동네기 주다 되나 지마르스 다디 동네 간걸로 주디 동네기 주디 버바 되거든 디버사베 디버바 쳐사 동네기 주다 되나 지마르스 니 동네기 주다 저를 주지 제 아니 동네기 주다 저 좌우 냠바지 이제 야 디버첩 침보를 중에 딘데 여러분 양 디동 디진만 둔도 삼 다단지 디 동네 잡고 나한테 버틴가 야 디베 줄레베 주다도 디발은 재미트 줄레 디진은 둔도 삼 야 동네기 줄레네 주삼 동네기 줄레네 심하다도네 강에 빠도네 동네 반점에 반이야 되게 주삼 아니야 뒤에 동네 주다 되는지 말 다티 미바 카브 되네 되네 되네야 제 예다 좀 되네 되네 밀라이나 담이 미네네야 강에 패 체메가 체디가 망부여봐 어두스지 되네 니 마제 되네 파마제 되네 파제 마제 파마제 되네 자제 어두스 미네 림바신도 미네 아니 동네도 되네 다지 어디 믹스 두스 미 되네 어디 센터
So then with respect to practice of compassion, then it is more effective to visualize sentient beings who are going through more intense suffering. So usually you can you visualize beings in the hell realm who undergo uninterrupted different types of sufferings. And also it is usually more effective to visualize people, even human beings who are undergoing intense physical or mental suffering. And then cultivate the intention that says that how I wish these sentient beings actually gain freedom from these sufferings, that in fact I'm going to ensure that they actually gain freedom from these sufferings. So once you have this intensity of compassion, then you again visualize a particular object, focus first on your mother, then on your father, then focus on a neutral person, then focus on your enemy, and then cultivate the wish to free them from their different types of sufferings, and then extend this compassion to all sentient beings.
어다디 닝지치제 되네 잠바다 닝지치 되네 학sam도 봐 학sam데다 잠바다 닝지 니가 된다 그게 다 제사 학sam도 치데 다티네 학sam도 치데 동네기 심제 탐제다 데이터 동네기 그다 저 제마 동네기 그다 저 그제 스타디제 아마 다 동네기 날신 대외 풍바 다치다 인지 잠베기 유대 대외 풍부지 그게라 닌지 유대가 동네기 나라지 그게라 다 학생세한테 대외 동행이 나시 대외 풍배 심제되는 네 대화다 대외 교단 된다 다기 저 동행이다 동행이 교단 저가 다기 저 우냐 버티다 다들 니지 미거다 할 잠베 미거 니가 상대래 다 다기 저 우냐 별로지기 동네다 동행이 교단 저 아니 동해기 나시 대외풍배 심제 통제 동해기 또 동해다 동해기보다 대화다기 저 대화다 대외교다 체바 덴바 다기 저 냠도 셈바티 학삼제 학삼그 치제 다티 심제 탐제를 미들어봐 다 공도 심제 탐제를 미대야 봤다 잠바티 심제 탐제를 미 저림바 신도미 인지티 심제 탐제를 림바 시디 미대야 봐 와다티 이미 유비 심제 도수는
So then the next practice is the logical culmination of practice of loving kindness and compassion is the practice of laksam, or which Tibetan translates superior mind or dedication, as it is translated. So the superior mind or dedication or laksam involves the meditative focus of both compassion and loving kindness, because in loving kindness the focus is beings who are deprived of well-being and happiness, and compassion the focus is beings who endure or undergo different types of sufferings. But here, with respect to the practice of superior mind or dedication, the focus is both sentient beings who are deprived of well-being and happiness, and sentient beings who are also undergoing different types of sufferings. And so, then by focusing on sentient beings who are undergoing sufferings and who are deprived of well-being and happiness, the superior mind's function is basically to take this personal responsibility, or making this personal commitment that says, I am going to ensure that sentient beings have happiness and the cause of happiness, that I'm going to ensure that sentient beings are freed of suffering and causes of suffering, and I'm going to take personal responsibility for that to happen. So that's the superior mind or laksam.
tenen 학생 들에 단지 야 학생 들에 그래서 다 먼저 맛이 진지도 침벌 받친 산이다 심제 탐제 대화다 대외교단 대한바다 동해도 동해기 주다 대화디 아니 지부적인 그래서 라는 진지 잠벨 내디 아니 지부제국의 미쇼지게 상계 장심의 카티 말이스 상계 장심의 라는 진지 잠벨 내디 상계 장심의 카티 말이 라는 제국의 인사 심제 탐제 대화도 대외교단 지부적인 동해도 동해기 주다 대화란 지부적인 달라상 교수 단대디 다기 저우세지 셰비마 다기 저우세지 지다 니지 교수 동네다 동네 저 주지 저 저는 지마로 저 주지 저 다기 저우세지 야리 다디 항상 교수가 저들은 지부지긴 제고야 그래서는 라는 진지 좀 렌디 상계 장심의 카티 말이 라는 이제 그래서 라니 지부지긴 세야돼 달라서는 된듯이
So this making of commitment that says, I'm going to ensure that sentient beings have happiness and cause of happiness, I'm going to ensure that they have that they be freed of suffering and cause of suffering. This happens also, this commitment also is made or happens during the practice of loving kindness or chamba, and during the practice of compassion or ningje. Because at the end of the compassion practice, we say, I'm going to ensure that sentient beings be freed of suffering and cause of suffering. But here, within the context of the practice of laksam or superior mind or dedication, you intensify that commitment, and that's I alone am going to take personal responsibility to ensure that sentient beings have happiness and cause of happiness, sentient beings have be freed from suffering and cause of suffering, and I alone am going to do this. I'm not going to leave it to the Buddhas or Bodhisattvas. And so that is the more intense form of commitment. And the reason for this is that when we have meditated on how sentient beings have been kind to oneself as being mothers and so forth, and when we recollect their kindness, we cannot, to repay the kindness of mother sentient beings, because they have been kind to you personally, you cannot leave the repaying to someone else. You cannot leave the repaying of kindness to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So because they've been sentient beings have been kind to you personally, you also make a resolution to repay the kindness personally by your own self, and that is the superior mind intention.
야, 전에 라삼께 라니 집이 스타체처럼 스타체처럼부터 전주부스는 배우를 뛰고 스타체처럼부터 다단다 심제 탐지기 중에다 세다 되었던데 장이 단다라는 내것도게 생각단다라는 내가 아마세네 년도 자전부터 전주 선배 친구도 설레 심제 탐지네 저 덴덴바지가 동가와 강에서 우리 집 배 진우는 누가미도 다티 심제 탐지기 된지야 강에서 했다 대화도 이야기 이것도 술을 다 상계를 두었어 나 상계 주고 맞다고 했어 또 비슷다 심제기 강에서 했다 대화도 이야기 집이 있어 견해처럼 다티 제부에 제도 단단한 답심 매우지 시도 술이 야래서는 상계 주고만 두야 답시 되는 안 소리를 내버려서는 다 상계 주고만 두기 아니 상계 주고만 두가 쇼스나 상계 대견 군세인데 군대 현재 그 탑을 그 주제 전부 이름에 봐줘봐 어떤 저기 인대에 산다 상계 주고만 두 상계를 인대를 내버려 상계를 상계 고만 두빈 스타 사람들 상계 고만 두는 거 봐야 봐 어떤 상계 주고만 두빈 상계 주 심지어 또 상계 주고만 두가 쇼세야 때 멤버 심지지
So then, after the meditations on superior intention or superior mind, laksam, the superior mind or intention practice culminates in the generation of bodhicitta. And this is the logical relationship or link is once you have decided that you alone are going to ensure that sentient beings have happiness and cause of happiness, and the sentient beings are freed of suffering and cause of suffering, then you ask whether you have that power at this present moment to benefit sentient beings in this way. And then you realize that as of now you don't have that power, and then you analyze who has that power, and only an enlightened person, perfect Buddha, has that power to benefit sentient beings in that way, because the Buddha is by definition omniscient, omnipresent, freed of all faults, and is endowed with all qualities, and is compassionate towards all beings without any kind of discrimination, and is skillful in the ways in which to benefit sentient beings. So therefore, since Buddha, an enlightened person, is the only person who can help sentient beings in that way, then you generate the intention to achieve Buddhahood or enlightenment, which by definition is motivational bodhicitta or intentional bodhicitta, or the two types of bodhicitta, Myoba Samgye, the intentional bodhicitta or the aspirational bodhicitta is cultivated in this way.
다때네 주바 생기 세야지 단 심제 같은 거 생기 주고만 토셔 제가 잠기 생기 주고만 토토나 샘데티 전주 심스드 멤버 생기시도 샘데티 님도 친구 싶어봐 이내야 토셔 제가 잠기 민지가 제에서는 다 토베 치도 생기 주고만 토베 치도 아니 유민지 파지도 신규민지 도용을 보시어서 다 계속이 줘발라 빈 삼바티 제베나 주바 생기시 생기 고반 터비치도 계속이 줘발라 주바 좀 두글롭들라 주바 생기시 다 달라 다 계속이 줘발라 로핀 생기 고반 터비치 터비쇼 상지 마침바 토지기 계속이 주발로 루핑 삼바 타바네 루핑 삼바 제베네 주바 생기시.
So then what is engaged bodhicitta or practical bodhicitta? Jupa Semgye. And engaged or practical bodhicitta is not to live bodhicitta at the aspirational level, where one aspires that one will engage in, one will achieve the state of enlightenment, to help other sentient beings lead to that state, but rather make a practical commitment that one is going to train in those causal factors that give rise to one's enlightenment. That is, by training in the 6 perfections to ripen or subdue one's own mind, and training in the practice of four practices of gathering disciples to subdue the mental continuum of other sentient beings. So when you make a commitment to engage in the 6 perfections and the 4 practices to gather disciples as a way to achieve the state of enlightenment, then that commitment is the commitment of engaged bodhicitta or practical bodhicitta.
Meju Rimji to Lembe on to Zayjangs. Lamrina la Meju Nibuti Rimji to Lembe on to Zayjangs. That then on to the Chundula Mena Nationale Simjetamje Kuvetu Menjatune, Sobejanju Chitala Kuvacha. Marisa. What is that? Sobejanju Toba Deve Sim, Dene from the Sangya Matoba. So the Chiang metal, some of the keys. The members in the Chogan in GT. Sobejanju Toba and Deve Sim said it. Timba. Toba and Deve Sim, the members in the Timba. Sangi Jukuan Toba Show somebody, members in Sobejanju Toba Deve Sim. Dene soon the doing the nation the Sangi Mato Chipat. Dene sung de sangye madoba sogi chiyame dan sunga kisi. Di len sung du zamba me sung choge lenbari. Da dene di ode sunga ki lama kiawa sejan dalo kumba tsuto chida ngungi di janju tuni kiawa taja. Dadari miyana wati dagi runa bina chiyana. Seya di juba janju juba simdi jugdum choge lenju diri. Ode dingi 카가도가 근데 람리도 림지도 다 람리 침묵 없어 림지도 내야 숨이 시월에 시월에 루다 지자루도 제나 주거대에 디촌에 다딘 디값수 대랑그 값수 안에 민주니 지자루도 렌주 초게 지자도 렌주 시비스 데 이제 다데
So after going through the methods of meditation on loving kindness, methods of generation of bodhicitta, then the way to adopt bodhicitta through religious ritual, through religious ceremony. This is the next topic. And in terms of adopting or generating bodhicitta through a religious ritual, a ritual ceremony, there are two. So in the text it says the way of adopting the mind generation through a religious ceremony has two. The first is the necessity to obtain the vow not obtained, and the second is the way to guard the vow obtained without ruining it. So with respect to the obtaining the vows not obtained before, again through a religious ceremony, one ritually obtain the vows of aspirational bodhicitta and practical bodhicitta. And there are two ways of doing this, as it is mentioned in the text. One is according to the Lamrim tradition, the stages of the path tradition, where the tradition is to take them in succession, receiving the vows of aspirational bodhicitta first, followed by receiving the practical bodhicitta. And this is what, as we do in the 6th session Guru Yoga, we do it in succession, right? We first receive the aspirational bodhicitta vows in the ritual ceremony, followed by practical bodhicitta. But according to Shantideva's system, these two vows of aspirational bodhicitta and practical bodhicitta are received simultaneously, and Panjan's easy path follows Shantideva's tradition of doing that simultaneously, receiving the vows simultaneously.
다 되라 돼. 자바라 네. 원주를 받지다. 원주를 받지다. 개발 기시 계획신이 등등의 전주를 생기 바르기 무심히 받주던 등 장배도 다들만 로장도 스마이 원벌을 다들 위에서 시작해 아주 라마 공심배 안에 말씀제 담지 있던도 전도 뉴도 양다부터 산지 주고가 도와자 이체도 뒤엔데네 송디스 제시 장주 님도라 치게 바르도 제레세기 동버 제세기 동버 송네 제발라부치라 로지 샘제 탐제 유ton도 산지 주고가 토바 자우냐베 샘디앙 다디 메신 샘디앙 산제 마토 주파도 손에 자우냐도 삼라 다디네 삼로 디타야 디디다 다 간제 샘디앙스 산제 통제게 샘디앙 산제 마토 주파도 손에 자우냐도 다디 계세그 동바 손에스 계세그 동바 손에스 산기 전주 선배 동바 손에 제발라부치라 롭징스 자지 유버생기 들어봐 롭징 샘제그 동도 산기 도바 저우냐데 샘디양 마토 산기 마토 집도 손에 저우냐도 삼루티다 되네 나마트베온 비제스 메바 저그러면에 어디 동발렌도 공연도 이 나마트베온 부게 마틴데 숨티네 알라마 산게 전주 셈바 구인스마스 아란 숨베체 아란두베야 딜레트스 산게 전주 셈바 구인스야디 전주 집에 메바체 다른 공부자도 쓰스마 수비에바 수는데 다른 공부자도 센터 집에 매버제 말한줄다 전주날에디 남아 저시지 말 수니 디 전주 집에 매버제 왜 어디 제인서 알아마나 산제 전주 선거 다른 공부자도 지다문지 디시기 전주군에 개발다 전주선거를 봐라 대단히 신내봤다 다게 보라 편도 전주선의 기 전주선거 멤버십도 나베기스 야디 tunjunaga diretuwa wati lensumichi 전주 선배 동바 도베메 바체 내 담에 그수는 전주 선배 동바 남바 다바치 토송에 베메 바체 어다티 메주니 저게 지자도 렌즈 티레스 tunjunaga diretuwa tunjunaga 디타 저게 전주도가 되는 순서 생겨면도 소위 지하면도 소위기 아니 라마게 버스잖아 무슨야디마 숨을라비네 아니 넘버도 요새마 나리리 전에 렘비네 되지 사이 저게 전주도가 되는 순서 생겨 소위 지하면도 소위기 라마 소위기 실내 숨을라 멤버십이 초기하는 거지. 이 차수는 남아져서는 다른 분들도 시대문제 있어야지. 연수도 주버심기 초기하는 거지. 같은데 이 두스 마제는 상기는 토이도 샘티한 소리 가서 자주는 소화지로 세송을 얻었지.
So, in terms of receiving simultaneously the aspirational bodhicitta and practical bodhicitta in the religious ceremony, you have to visualize your Lama deity on top of your crown and think as follows. So as in the text it says, then meditating on the Lama deity on the crown of your head, think as follows. So up to here, when you actually engage in receiving the aspirational and engaged bodhicitta, it is presumed that you have that this ceremony is preceded by prior analytical meditation on bodhicitta. And once you're ready, then you visualize your meditation on the deity on top of your crown, and then briefly think in this way that for the sake of all sentient beings, my mothers, I will quickly attain the high state of completely perfect Buddha. And so here the aspirational and practical bodhicitta are combined. So here it says, in order to do that, I will keep the bodhisattva vows, and then also train in the great deeds of bodhisattvas, which is basically practical bodhicitta. And after generating this combined aspiration, then you visualize yourself repeating after your root lama, your guru deity, and the actual words of the ceremony are exactly the ones that we find in the sixth session Guru Yoga when you actually receive the practical bodhicitta vows, right? But when we engage in the verses of the practical bodhicitta from the sixth session, in terms of intention, we are simultaneously receiving both aspirational and practical bodhicitta. In the sixth session Guru Yoga, they are received in succession. First, intentional bodhicitta, followed by practical bodhicitta. But here, we're receiving them simultaneously, and we are visualizing that we are repeating after the Guru deity. So, in the text, the actual verses for the ceremony, which is exactly the same as the succession Guru Yoga, it says, "All Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, please pay attention to me. Just as the precious one gone to bliss generated the altruistic aspiration and gradually abided in the Bodhisattva trainings, so also will I generate the altruistic intention for the welfare of all beings and learn gradually the Bodhisattva trainings." So we have to recite it 3 times and repeat it 3 times. So visualize that we are repeating it 3 times. And at the end of the 3rd repetition, then we have to cultivate the conviction that you have given rise to both aspirational and intentional bodhicitta.
심기 표체도 군주부 쳐봐서 손이를 좀 아니 심기 표체도 네 군주부 쳐봤어 아니 야 심지를 몇 년씩 구매하러 제대로 이식을 쳐도 주인이 쳐도 좀 알았지. 이제 시야 라마라 소리 우리다 세계 지도양 주인이 보고 스타트디 단대들이 단디 시야세디 자주의 셈 냠바집에 그 나주시 세지 단 나주시 나네 나주시 나네 담부디 중기 제도 슬라마를 얻고하지 다단데디 라마소라 라마도 르반라 소바 파마라 소바 딘데 우리 땅 세계의 지도야 잘못당 딘데의 지도야 좀 우고민 삼지 지리 나주 담부디 중기 얻고하더라 중기 얻고와 스티체 나주 신개와 제발라 개바제바제바 신개와 제발라 네 개바제도 주스네 그냥 나 자주 셈냠비 줄을 나주 니바디리 티진의 슈베 자주 셈발라 시당기 민님바 마와디 나베추 숨바디체 사상 마인베 유기 제바디 나주 나베추 실어서봐
사서 많이 배.
생기년에 주나 보아서 공비 인해서 나주시
사서 많이 배는 가서.
아
사서 많이 배. 담배.
아니
사서 많이.
하서 뭐인데对对
담배.
하서 뭐인데 유교 하서 뭐인데 하서 유교제 사상 그는 유교제지나 제 근데 지 아니네 지 유교제지 유교제 그냥 이지 뭐지 리다지 뭐지 리다지 대지 친비나 네 리다지 친송에서는 뭐지 그가 치는 길에 맞죠 지레 그랬지 맞지 그가 치 지레 뭐지는 하선 유주제로 하선 뭐 유주 그들이 그 치면 수세는 주의를 봐. 이제 지친 거라. 어디 말하는 중이 뭐지 레를 그 누가 치.
땡즈 다서 되고요. 뒤를 보지. 뒤 무지 숨어온다. 땡즈 다서 되고요.
내가 뒤뒤 등도 됐죠. 배 민족의 전주 동발한데 등주다 제부 미스구나 와
아니 시신 된다래.
아 말이
뭐야?
배
응.
나 전에 전주 등주다 좀 제부 유스 다 제부 유
가와
미스발을 모두 가고 공부들 디리상계를 수계 상계서 다교도 가고 공부들 초반에 나서도 알레 디데르 봐
So then to cement your bodhisattva vows, then
디데도 다니 다리 진이장 리다 준비를 좀 됐어 리다 준비 리전 주신 배를 기브라 봐 제사 전주 선배리도 천반나 신이래 정리인스 교매 준비리들라서 아니 교매 준비했으니 제주 선배니 동바대 계획 니동기 마급에 이들라 녀범이 됐지 이 안들라 아니 녀범이 됐지 제주 선배 저도다 니제라서 그때가 매고 적응이 있어야 돼
to cement or to stabilize your bodhisattva vows, then you recite this verse of joy after receiving the bodhisattva vows, where it says, it is also in the succession guru yoga, now my life is fruitful, I have fulfilled this human life. Today I've been born in Buddha's family, I have now become Buddha's offspring. Now all that I do will accord with the Buddha's family. I will not defile its purity and excellence. So this is to give rise to joy of having received bodhisattva vows, which then becomes a factor to stabilizing one's bodhisattva vows. Then the next practice through this religious ceremony is the practice of guarding the vows obtained without ruining it or without causing damage or transgression with respect to the vows. So for this particular purpose, again, you visualize the meditation, Lama Deji on the top of the crown, and then you have to think in this way. That for the sake of sentient beings, my mothers, I will quickly attain the state of perfect Buddhahood. And then, in order to do that, I will think about the benefits of altruistic aspiration to achieve this high state of enlightenment for the sake of other sentient beings, and then adopt it 3 times during the day and 3 times during the night. So the practice basically involves generating bodhicitta 3 times during the day and 3 times during the night, by reflecting on the benefits of altruistic aspiration or bodhicitta. So you reflect as a way to guard the bodhisattva vow. You reflect on the benefits of bodhicitta 3 times during the day, 3 times during the night, and then also you make a commitment that whatever sentient beings may do from their side, like even if you are good to sentient beings, sometimes some sentient beings can still harm you and so forth. So whatever sentient beings may do from their own side, but from your own side, you should never give up even one single sentient being because of that. So that's one kind of reminder that we engage in to further ensure that the bodhisattva vows are not broken. And then also, in order to ensure that the vows are kept, we make this particular commitment that says, in order to increase the altruistic aspiration of bodhicitta, I will engage in the assembling the 2 accumulations, the accumulation of merit and accumulation of wisdom. So accumulation, the gathering of the 2 accumulations also become a way to safeguard your bodhicitta vows. And then it says, I will make offerings to the 3 jewels. And also making offerings to the 3 jewels also become a way to guard your bodhisattva vows. Then it says, further, I will abandon the causes that ruin the altruistic aspiration, such as the 4 black practices. So the 4 dark practices are, first of all, deceiving with false actions, even for the purpose of joking around and causing your lamas and so on to laugh. The Tibetan version says, like, basically, not it doesn't have that section that says causing your lamas to laugh and so forth, but it's basically which I think has been a tricky translation, because deceiving with false actions, even for the purpose of joking or cracking jokes, or even for the purpose to cause laughter, and joking, which really means the same thing in the Tibetan version. So this section, it says, or causing your lamas to laugh, you can delete that. So it says deceiving with the purpose of even lightly, in the spirit of cracking jokes and so forth. That is that also is one of the dark practices. The second is creating regret in others who are doing virtuous actions. So this is someone doing wholesome actions, then you say stuff that they regret. Doing that is one of the dark practices. Then saying unpleasant words out of anger to bodhisattvas, the next one, those who have entered the vehicle. and then misleading others without the unusual attitude. So misleading others without superior intention. Laksam, the unusual attitude is actually the translation for Tibetan laksam, which came earlier, which is the superior intention or superior mind. So how can they be misleading of others with superior intent? So Rinpoche was laughing earlier on this particular point, and Rinpoche said it is possible. For example, when the classic example, right, parable in Buddhism is like there was a hunter chasing a deer, and then there was a meditation master, and the deer passed, the meditation master as the deer was running, and then the hunter asked the meditator, did you see the deer, right? So if he says no or show the wrong direction, that's lying, right? But still, a kind of misleading action with the superior intention can be that you may choose not to answer that. You may just busy yourself doing something and then choose not to answer that, which is also kind of misleading, but misleading with the right intention. So Rinpoche was earlier laughing at this. So therefore it says, with respect to this particular practice of guarding the vows, I'll train properly in the courses that increase the altruistic aspiration by relying on the 4 wise practices and so forth. So avoiding the 4 dark practices and adopting the 4 pure white practices.
Junju dale kasa nyama junju nala cho jitu kara chudin la peja gashi nala chudin kara sabri jilma wala kara sabri nawa yuye se sunyi ba kara sabri Sanji di Sanjay di Tina Chinsu Suna Ko Sanjay di Sola Ya Minga Yarba. And Dinjay Chitu Ya Sola Minga Chitu. Tila Junyo di Sherina, Jun Tamu di Sherina. Neba Mes. Chida Jun di Neba Yarba. Or di Yansa. Di Junju Nali Jisu Yarba. Nyan Jisu.
So I think there is also a reference on this particular point in Shantideva's Bodhisattva's Way of Life, where Shantideva actually says there are some occasions when you are actually licensed to lie, so to speak. Like for example, to protect lives, just in this particular case, lying is actually permitted.
Delamnala Gabi Chi Temba la Sobe, the Soguna Mishu, Gachu, she the Sung, that Gachu she would did it. She seemed to Zuma or Bambas, Chiche. Simjela, you do maybe, Samba, Jambul, Nebas, Nietzsche. Johnson Namla, Dumbe Dushi, Gaging, Donella. Donate number cheva, then the two number cheva. Rangi member cheve, Simjela, Sobe Janju, Jubati, Janju, Zindu Jubati. Rangi Jin member cheve, Simjes and Rangi Jin. Ya, member cheve, Simjes and Rangita. Rangi Oloni Sikarasu, Council, Denge Chepe, Denge di. Jaju Chotus, 17 Chupas. That Lam local Pam Madam Rang member Simje, Zobe Janju, Zindu, Jubati, Gaju Shis, Gabishi Chushi said di janju sebe janju sempe karjushis.
So then here in the easy part, there's simple reference to the four pure white practices, but not actually mentioning them. So the four pure white practices are not to consciously lie or not to consciously engage in the act of lying. The second is not to deceive sentient beings and always be truthful towards sentient beings. The third is to regard bodhisattvas as one's teachers and give them appropriate praises and veneration. And the fourth is to encourage and guide one's disciples to cultivate bodhicitta. So those disciples that one has karmic links with to be ripened, to encourage them, to guide them to give rise to cultivate to bodhicitta. So these are four white pure practices that helps one to enhance bodhicitta.
Tene dādiri nāchū shīvē nyingbu kāchū nipa tāngs. Nāchū shīvē te yinba rāsā ma yinbē yūkyū cheba te nāchū shīvē te yinba. Di nyingbu te kāchū nipa. Kāchū nipa te karere sena simjē yūkyū meba. Samba tāmbur nipa te yinba. Tene nāchū nipa nyingbu kāchū shīvās. Nāchū nipa te karere sena shēng kiawa cheba la gyoba jeba te yinba. Oti nyingbu te la kāchū shīvā. Kāchū shīvās. Kāchū shīvā te rāngi mīmba cheba simjē la simjala zobe chanchu zindu juba ase suna dati nāchū nipa ki nipa chi nāchū nipa ti shen kiawa la ngyoba jeba chi shen kiawa jeba la ngyoba jeba chi stasi shen pe chanchu sim kumara tinte te cheba shen kiawa cheba la ngyoba je juba ti nyingba ti rangi mingba cheba sim je chanchu chodo sim zindu juba ti yin suna wala te te che shine tiki ta nyingba shinda tiki te yinba
So the four dark practices have the corresponding antidotes in the four pure white practices, except that the antidote of the fourth dark practice, which is basically to deceive sentient beings without any superior intention, without any kind of altruistic intention, which is the fourth dark practices. Its corresponding antidote is the second pure white practice, which is basically not to deceive sentient beings and to be truthful. And then the antidote of the second dark practice, which is basically to give rise to regret in beings who engage in wholesome actions. Its counterdote is the fourth dark practice, which is basically encouraging and guiding one's own disciples and sentient beings to give rise to bodhicitta. So the rest are, as they are.
자동 접계다. 자 전주 선배 자동들 자동 접계 예제 시주시도에. 어때? 자동 접계다. 예제 시도. 예배 남양 마급에 전주 선배 동반 넘버 답아. 소단도 이제 지세 전주 님불의 치기 봐도 송을 자우스. 어디 도나시아데 도르티나 전주 선배 동반랑 차주자 생기 전주 선배 동배 저도 주게 예제 시도 되게 막 송을 자우스. 송그 그레스 대다 송네 발라만에 진기를 수스나만을 소왔다 지지배 자체 자도서 지지배 자체 지버리
So then, in the end, then you meditate by saying that, in brief, I'll keep until I reach the essence of enlightenment, though it may cost my life. Pure bodhisattva vows, which is not sullied by the faults of the 18 rude transgressions and 46 wrong deeds. So we talk about 18 rude vows of bodhisattvas and 46 wrong deeds. Please bless me, Lama, to be able to do that. And so after this prayer, then you invite the nectar and rays, and so the visualization involved and the thoughts that you have to entertain are exactly as before. So the caution was with regard to a particular Tibetan Lama, reincarnated Lama, Soba Rinpoche, who recently self-immolated himself in Tibet. But prior to his self-immolation, he left a taped message. And in the message, he says that, I'm not doing this out of anger. I'm not doing this out of, hatred or desire. I'm not doing this for my name or fame, so that people say, "Oh, you're like hero." But I'm dedicating it for happiness, long life, His Holiness Dalai Lama, happiness for sentient beings, and happiness that there may be peace in Tibet. And he did a mandala offering of his body. He was doing a mandala prayer, and the question was, would that be a Tonglen practice, right? Would that be a giving and taking practice that you were mentioning? Rinpoche said, with that kind of clear intention, it definitely is, because we are talking about giving one's body, wealth, and we're just talk of karma. So this is basically with the right intention. When you actually dedicate your body for other sentient beings, then it's definitely a Tonglen practice.
개부장배 또 구청됐지. 정말 미지분을 차 굴을 차진승 차진야. 근데 근데 개부가리래 지도 구청도 전반에 굴을 당수 어떠수 디바 가서 그래. 다시 염지 그래서 다시 염지 쿵이 봐. 어디 쿵뜻이 따뜻이 두개를 봐. 동네.
So earlier, for example, we mentioned that the Buddha giving his body to the hungry tigers, right? That was actually given an example of the practice of exchanging oneself with others. That they are, that it is done. That was an example. So graphically, it's really like kind of killing oneself, but it is done out of the right greatest compassion for the hungry travelers and the calves. And likewise, we mentioned earlier when Buddha was a prince one time, then he gave his body and blood to 5 yaksha sons, and so these are actually uh, given as examples of how there is a precedence of practice of exchanging oneself with others.
But would the Rinpoche accumulate the negative karma from killing himself, from the suicide? Right? Because of the negative karma in the future.
아니 저거를 뭐 이제 다들 동네집에 걸로 소소 미 세백이 들어 미 세백이 이제 어디 그런 이제 어디 열었어.
말했더니 산계리 굴을 지은수가 산계리 굴을 지은들이 미세를 해봐야 말했어.
No, so it's like the Buddha when he gave his body to the hungry tigers, right? He didn't accumulate the act of killing himself because that's in this kind of context with the right intention, it does not amount to killing.
내 지기 시부지 자가는 내 시부지 요네디 야르티도 그 야르티도 가서지 디비티 샤티 핑기스 지나니 디 겨와시니 그냥 그리고 지은수가
Like for example, again in one of Buddha's like lifetime as a bodhisattva, there was a story about how there was an epidemic in India, killing a lot of people, and the only way that epidemic can be cured was eating a particular fish. And then it is said that the bodhisattva actually took bird as that fish, and then and it causes the right condition for people to catch him and kill him in the process of it. So therefore, these are intentional acts out of compassion. So it does not amount to killing.
I heard that if someone tries that before reaching the path of seeing, it could be a bad deed. But if they've reached the path of seeing, then it can be virtue. What does Rinpoche have to say?
그래서 거래 거슬러서 던자디 통람하도 벌도 자 심지 담제라 심지 돈랑솔로 다녀라 되기 미기위기 예와 싸고 그랬어. 근데 통람 통나 아니 속 심지도 속로다 속소소소로잖아. 근데 아니 미기위기 교도고 말했어 거기서.
미기위기 주산 나사이야 말이 돈은 마토콘도 그다음에 뒤집이는 단 최두가를 누기야리스 최두야 우리 덴티메르스 샤르바 돈은 토스는 네 비itender티 강해야 말이스 비itentan 강해면도 전부 최두가를 바제지 두야 말이스 디리미 수지 디버선 나서기지 게
강에 무슨 강에 저치마 밀레라 소라.
좋아하다 지다 여러가 돈은 토스는
반지
이제 좋아를 잡고 딘데다 이야말이라 지다 네 유디 나만의 신내야 니베야 니디 라야 덴도 주네 류 나만의 신내야 딘데야 근데 뒤에는 돈은 마토 콘트 제베는
반지
담배 취두배 바지르지 뭐 갖다 바지 지금 봐 유지 쓰는 두고 말아 봐 아니 근데 담배 취두 바지르지 소리 유진디 재산한테 디바사나 설계지게
Rinpoche said, like, there's no debate about whether giving one's body prior to understanding emptiness directly, prior to path of seeing, is negative or positive. When you, with the intention of compassion, when you give up your body, there's no doubt that this is virtue. There can be no, it can never incur negative karma in a sense, in that it is not a negative karma itself. But the debate is, or the issue is that prior to the path of seeing, if you give your body, even though the act itself is good karma, but it can be a hindrance to your path of practice. Because once you reach the path of seeing, then not only that because of emptiness, not only that there is no hindrance to the path of practice, because you can be totally detached in the process, but also you have the capacity or the power to take rebirth again as a human being to continue the practice, or in some cases high bodhisattvas, through the power of truth they can rejuvenate themselves from the injury and so forth. But that is something that is not the case with people or practitioners who have not achieved that state. So therefore, if they sacrifice themselves, there is no guarantee that that person might actually take real life as a human person, and continue with the practice. So therefore, even though the act itself is positive, it can become a barrier for continued practice.
근데 차단 공투선 담배는 다 이야르바 시단 공 단에 이내버야리 차배운 그 단에 이번에 랑 강내만 그 지체 내지 양지 딜레 지데 딜레 마데브체 친 신의 대화용설의 삼사진의 차배운 두선을 강내를 딘데 친 딘데 제비는 디바인
And of course, if like if the act of self-immolation or suicide is triggered by negative emotions, then of course it is negative action, negative karma by nature. Out of anger, even if you engage in self-immolation or suicide by thinking that this life is not worthwhile, from some sort of self-hatred, then you commit suicide, and then with the hope that the next life would be better, right? So that kind of self-suicide is committed through both craving and aversion. So therefore, that's definitely negative. So the intention.
Lama Savar Muchi Tonamato Bay
But also with respect to like Lama Sopa Rinpoche who committed suicide, like self-immolation, we cannot judge whether he has actually achieved the path of seeing or not. He could have been, we could have been in that state too.
Yeah.
I had a question about karma. Rinpoche and like other like great lamas, like I hear them say that karma is like not deterministic. But to me, that doesn't make sense. If everything you're experiencing is a result of karma, then like where does the choice come in? The free will, isn't the choice already made up by what your karma is? Or I don't understand how it's not deterministic.
So sometimes Rinpoche, Lama Mangboji is those less as well. Less the 고림 때문에 제사오시 사오시 맞을라 데 가른 용내 세들라 가른 용나래 가르 지내를 상마 레기 그쪽을 때문에 저는 레기 때문에 제사나 남거스 개미도스 다리무치다 본적은 나빌 근데 말에 레스인데 말이스 다지 그레 가르서는 먹어게 아니 소소기 깨는데 얘기다 지금 그거 당해요 딱 거기 레기 남셔들나 삼성도구나 레스도로 당번에 땜 제사오지 보고도 쇼든 가서 내 가래네 내게 온거 있나? 난 가서 남가서 가도 돼. 남가 문도서 왔다.
다 이제 레디 그 내가 써야 열봐 배나 아란주 신가지 가는 사병을 치던 아니 그걸 주자니다 근데 매배다 양그 매도 써야 열봐 디 레디 게 나비 레디 개와 주베 또기 매도 써야 됐어 상불레디야 상불레사브레디야 콘드도 네스웨리스 견드네 세야레 그 담부 템비 제브레디 템비 제브나신 마요야리다 디네리 야 나빌레디 네스웨 최제네 그래서 지켜도 지금 그는 내가 차야 되는데 가빌레디야 콘드라스오바딘디 또기 야 메브스와이아리스 제시드드 어디리 제셔서 덴베디 네버게 마리스
So even though it seems like that when we talk about karma, it seems like it's like predestined, but that's not really the case. What we say is that whatever we experience has some sort of karmic imprint. So karma has to be understood in the sense of having karmic imprint, but those imprint have to be activated through your choice, through your active action of which you have control. So very much like in the physical world, karma is like saying there's a seed, and the seed has a potential to bloom into some flower or some tree, right? So that's what all this karma is saying, is the seed has the potential. But if you leave the seed without giving fertilizers, without giving the right sunlight, without giving water and so forth, the seed itself does not have the potential. So your choice is not, if it's like negative karma, your choice is to make sure that negative karma does not experience as suffering, is not to like give water, not to give fertilizers, not to give sunlight. And so that basically means with respect to negative karma, engaging in powerful kind of wholesome positive actions, what we call as accumulation of merit and so forth, with which even the seed to give rise to suffering can be eradicated, purified. So therefore it's not predestined like that.
Thank you.
Oh yes.
무디 수행다.
I just want to check. Rinpoche mentioned, like, for equanimity that there were 9 kinds, 3 in relation to self, 3 in relation to other, and 3 from an ultimate point of view. But I wasn't. It wasn't clear to me what, how to differentiate those 9.
아니면 그 땅용디 꼴보기 왕도 전에 아니 족제로 땅에 있습니다. 랑원에 숨, 제거는 숨, 전담동원에 숨. 디디 가르가르 그래면 디지 고지 그라쳐었어.
디타 랑원에 때가 숨 디타 랑원에 때가 숨 열바 샹원에 때가 숨제 군주 전담에 때가 숨제 그때 링부 열바 링부에서 샹원에 때가 베치 이 세부지 요즘 주시 지디 이또 지자는 다디 이제 밥은 가기 전에는 이 저번 내내 소리지 소 다시 인연 됐을 때 단디 뛰는 거
Which is like the 9 types of equanimity, therefore, within the context of equalizing and exchanging oneself. It's kind of elaborate, and sorry, you didn't mention about it before. But Judge Papunga says that there is no guarantee or necessity that this is always the case, that there are 9. Papunga does not actually neatly kind of divide these into 9 equanimity, but Trijang Rinpoche in his writings actually mentioned at least 3 of these 9 types of equanimity. So first of all, there is the equanimity as referring to free from discrimination of discriminating beings into friends and relatives and enemies and neutral people. So even in that context, if we look at this equanimity, there are 2 aspects to it. One is basically with respect to the object themselves, that is sentient beings themselves, how you wish sentient beings themselves will abide in that equanimity, free from discrimination, as dividing sentient beings into friends and enemies, and so that is in relation to these objects, right? But then there is this kind of equanimity also has an aspect of the subject, the meditator, and that is basically the meditator wishes himself or herself, or how he may actually abide in this equanimity of not discriminating beings into friends and enemies and so forth. So when we talk about like Tangyum or great equanimity within the context of the 4 types of immeasurables, one of them is like immeasurable equanimity. That equanimity has 2 aspects to it. One is with respect to the object, one is with respect to the subject, that is the practitioner. And so within the context of mind training practice, bodhicitta practice, how one is asked to develop equanimity prior to meditating on sentient beings as one's mothers, right? That equanimity refers to the subjective equanimity, not the objective equanimity.
ramnilam doya dunge chamutang mendu dewa jidam junya choshi mebataris 어디나신 심제 담제장 타나 무슨 장무 준제 대원들 받아 동해면도 고군에 냠배 아니 돈에 재미리 냠바다 어디 지여버도 지그 제버송 지금 말이 아니 제사 돈에 재미리 봤어 요즘 찍다들이 그네 여랑 근데 되면 시 심제 탐제 그네서 무슨 참을 준제 대원도 샤다 내면 되고 공부에 참들이 그냥 봐서 찍제
Rāda tuve,
신도 되게
shēra tuve.
그때는 담부디랑 그냥 봐봐 이내야 별랑네 아니 디나시 심제 탐제 변에 타는 무슨 참을 준제 대원도 그냥 봐 동해면 되고 공부에 그냥 봐 냠베 도네치 지미리 바탕스 도네치 다 도네치 미리 바세드랑 응네 시게르바 근데 심제 코나도 딘제 레샤스 제사랑 응네 지 이어도 지 제로 송기 말이 시제 제 담부티
So the first conventional practice with respect to others is to think that just as using one as an example, just as one's happiness, even in one's dream, even in one's dream state, that one inherently aspire for happiness. That all sentient beings, including the minutest of the insects, inherently has this drive for happiness, drive for well-being. And so therefore, in this sense, there is no difference whatsoever from all possible angles between oneself and sentient beings in this fact that all seek happiness and well-being. And because of that, not to discriminate sentient beings, not to abandon even a single sentient being. So that is one equanimity, conventional equanimity based on other sentient beings. Even though we use this one's own example, it's still based on other sentient beings.
배다 등이 담부들의 배다 등이 누가 배들랑 미는 새들과 저한테 되지. 단 이버들의 내 맛에 배나 장부주 롱롱하나 탐제 롱 집에 아니 집에 탐제가 세 일이 매버 세진 일이 매버 일이 자동이 매버 따라서 탐제 답 방구주 세로니 방구주에나 주부디 담제 노년이 버치버리 스티임베인산 세 진야들의 일이 자동 내버려서 개배지지 이질이야 일이 자동이야 말 세 진야들 디나신 심제 탐제 사맥이 되었다지 사제기 되어 참모양 참모장에 토방님의가 님의가 마탈 건배 대풍시 대풍 받지버지 대화 전등이와 자월에 한걸로 심제 강구 대풍 받지버 대화 전등이와 자월에서 일이 내발 팬데 pending number of Gulatans. Rangi, Simji Kurandu Mune, Dewanduba, Dere Pumbanyam, Dewa Dundu Nyan Java Insa, and Niri Meba, pending number 2. What did Jerry?
So then the second is then again just like in the first case there is an example and then the meaning is illustrated with that example. So the example is if 10 beggars came begging for food, they are equally deprived of food, then there is no reason to discriminate between these 10 beggars begging for food because they are equal in the sense they are equally deprived of food. Likewise, all sentient beings are deprived of even contaminated happiness, let alone uncontaminated happiness. Even with respect to contaminated happiness, their contaminated happiness are as rare as the stars during the daytime. And so since this is the case, then there is no reason to discriminate. That in fact we should be, without any discrimination, we should be able to equally, with great sense of equanimity, give rise to or actualize or accomplish well-being and happiness for sentient beings. So therefore, first is they are all equal in seeking happiness and well-being. And the second is they are equal in the sense that they are equally deprived of well-being and happiness. And so there is no need to engage in a practice of discrimination, that we should be able to equally engage in the act of accomplishing well-being and happiness for others.
That somebody never Nyamtaba Kashe Yunus. Dikun Nyamtaba Nyambes. Negi Nyamtaba Nyambarkis. Tella Chadanta Tony Jirim Jena. Tella Chadanta Tony Rabin Jelina. Jena Rani Gun Batar. Semje nam stati petiche, semje nam nyumutu sungi shewantu sumne kwa chidang chedagi dungi sumbu chirigi. Nyamtaba nyambe jang, ani tone chidumeba, peche yuche sum.
So then the third is when we come across with a group of people who are sick, there is no reason to discriminate among them because they are all sick. And if we do discriminate in terms of who we should help and whom we shouldn't help, then that is our own fault. We would have to accept that as one's own mistake and nothing to do with from the side of the object because they are all equally sick. So very much like that is all sentient beings in that they all are sick or they suffer from the state of afflicted emotions or negative emotions. And so because of that, again, there is no point in engaging in discrimination.
That's Ramon Latone, Kuvetuchi, Sumti, that Tambudi, Rani Tabata Tamji Kimbe, Coburn Duna Young, Samje Tamja Latin Gavamase, Twamen, Samje Tamje, Rangi Tira Mambu, Pamachevata, Zashi so Nidu. Nyendu Kuriti, Randa Pentaba, Tabra Nyambe, Rangune, Ditatan, Dingy, Shi Niri, Tantoni, Chimiribas, Tambuti, Randa Tunic, Tambuti.
So then these were the 4 reasons based on three reasons based on other sentient beings, how to engage in the practice of conventional equanimity based on other sentient beings. So now the 3 reasons to engage in practice of equanimity based on conventional practice of equanimity based on one's own self. And the first reason is that in order to achieve for liberation and state of perfect Buddhahood for oneself, one has to depend on other sentient beings. And likewise, sentient beings have been kind to oneself in countless number of lifetimes, sometimes as one's mothers, sometimes as one's husbands and wives, sometimes as relatives, sometimes as friends and so forth. And so in that sense, all sentient beings have been equally kind to oneself. So because of that, from one's own side, there is no reason to engage in discrimination. So that's the first reason.
Simje namji rang la neba chebe negabdi kabri le menjing odi daba simje rang neba chebe kabri meshu chi yamarwa ni menjing ngata gyune penta be negabdi shindu mawa rāna pēntu bēt, ngōs pēntu bāt, gyūne pēntu bāt, tā bē shindu māwa rāba, pēnta bē negab nē, chē shindu māwa, tā dē negab lā dējiāng, shē bāt tā rā yīmbē yās, tā dē negab bē shēne yāng, rāngi tīki kāngā, simjē kī pēnta bā rā tūni chūngā rāba, simjē kī tāmbu rāñi, simjega shigi tamburani kitu tamba yende yamari nor lonju yamari shato to chike chitebro tene ma yende enta tene nor lonju la so anti de chigi ko tusu ngata gyube simje tan chigi penta bal ten chumar ba tinsa penta be ne bun che shindu ma ta de ne ko 대장 셰바타리 다데네가 베타나 삼탄 하부리스 제산 니리당 돈에 지주민도 삼바치 강만에
So then the second reason is then why one might wonder that even though sentient beings have been kind to oneself in many ways, like that, sometimes as one's parents, sometimes as one's relatives and so forth, it is also, one might think that, but it is also the case that sentient beings have also harmed oneself as enemies and so forth. And so if we have this calm, then we have to understand that even though it is the case that sentient beings have harmed us as well, but if we would compare between those times when sentient beings have helped us and harmed us, then those times when sentient beings have helped us are relatively very few. But most of the time, sentient beings have directly and indirectly helped us. And this can be actually understood if we take this life into consideration. If we take this life into consideration, the times when sentient beings are helping us directly and indirectly are much more than times when they actually harm us. So, for example, from birth, till maturity, for sustenance in the beginning of life, then for education, for personal development, for our wealth, and all of that is dependent directly or indirectly on many other sentient beings. So even from that angle, there is no reason to engage in discrimination.
다 somebody 데레 마세 라니 치우랑 시 남치를 참여했어. 라니 네바도 치우랑 네바했어. 가도 지금은 하고야 말했어. 그러나 다 수익을 내배 나진开始 정가지도 예나 상인 수익이 미디 돈을 라신이 처리 당 차단 제가 중조다. 생이 수바랑 예배 미스를 주나 수부디 돈을 제 파주 차단 처리 지림매버 제가 옆에 저 중심으로 봐. 생이 관계 시야리 아니 더리디 차단지에 그래서 지림매버 주주가 시지라 중화따라 라시 탕제 메타베 카르추가 집에서 라시 탕제 이야 치와 메타베 시원도 로야티 집에서 이 집에 인사는 아니 디리야 차단 돈에 아니 지린 가야야 말이스 매체싱에디 통도 지르바 통도 지 간것이 치와 탐제 진행해봐. 어디 집에서 매주 통도들이나 차단 지림 매버 지르겠어. 돈에 지림 가야 매버 삼바지 규제 수무스.
And the third reason is again we explain with an example and then the actual meaning. So the example is first of all the meaning is that there is no reason to engage in discrimination because of the fact that oneself and all sentient beings are all equal in that we are that we're all certainly going to die, except that the time of death is not certain. So from that point as well, there's no need to engage in discrimination. So the example is, if there were a group of criminals to be executed the next day, then there is no need to engage. If we were to engage in discriminatory practices, if they were to engage in discriminatory practices because they're all going to even though they're all going to be executed the next day, what we can say is it's pretty pointless. So very much like that, when all sentient beings are equal in that we are all certain to be certain. There's certainty that we are all going to die, and in fact, the time when we are alive is very short, just one lifetime, and when death is very certain, there is no point, so to speak, to engage in act of discrimination.
팬도긴다 니세야디 로츠베베 따바 따신 수마타르투나 로츠베온게 베 따바탄 딘디치리스 로츠베온게 따샤바치리 메슈지 되나 네 자타이메시야디 야마리 디유나 상게기 시쿠블레 상게기 시야마리스 그래서는 디시시바 넘버 탐제 kimbe 이시기 때다 시두발레 디시야 말이 마시야 그래서는 디시시바 쿨라 젠데 주바지바 보티다 그 쇼치레 아니 디우기 nemba 디우시나 신샤야 디기 디우시야 디기 nemba니 녜다 달라 마시바 지기년다 지 잘못 시버가 아니 니리 차단 제사 디디 단위 유네 디시고 몰레 디시야 말이스 sanjiki di tayins di ni sibe siyamarba wati insa namdele jende tiu chumba la chade shin jebanyes ta namde tawana le diya wati shone chupa chunye di tang shochine tiu shani chenyi buti 아니 차단 대회에서 지리 니에서 지리 자세가 되네요. 시야메. 나랑도 그 차단 관계 자신에서 직답을 따인게 봐. 차단만 봐서 인사. 어디 제 장애심에 뒤파야 된바 있나? 생기게 시구리도 생기게 시야메. 인에서 나랑도 그 차단 공부 파를 주변 그 다시 아버지
So then, three reasons from the point of view of ultimate, from the point of view of the ultimate. Three reasons why there's no point in engaging in discrimination. The first reason or first evidence is that we consider those who help us as friends and those who harm us as enemies, that we identify and then discriminate into these groups by identifying those who help us as friends and those who harm us as enemies is something that is product of a distorted mind, and that in the ultimate sense there is no enemies or friends, and the reason is if there are in the ultimate sense friends and enemies, then the Tathagatas or the Buddhas should actually see it, perceive it, experience it. But the reason for the fact that the Buddhas did not perceive in the ultimate sense true enemies and true friends is because of the fact that ultimately there are no such things as enemies and friends. And just as it is mentioned in Pramanavartika, where if one person were to apply sandalwood water on Buddha's right side, and the other person were to cut a Buddha or an enlightened person with a blade, the Buddha would still be equanimous in the sense that the Buddha would not discriminate these two individuals into being one's enemies and friends. And if there are, from the ultimate point of view, true enemies and true friends, then at that very instance, the Buddha would perceive it, the Buddha would identify it, and identify the person who's applying sandalwood as one's friends, and the person who's cutting with a blade as one's enemies. But because of the fact that Buddha didn't do it, is a sure evidence that from the point of view of the ultimate, there are no such things as true enemies and true friends. And then the reason why we automatically divide sentient beings into enemies and friends when this happens to us is because of the presence of craving and aversion within us. And craving and aversion is the distorting factor. Craving and aversion intuitively makes us discriminate those who help us as friends and those who harm us as enemies.
그래서 저는 장애 세계수 저버디 랑게 주베 낭노점 코너이 녀버디 코너이 세 녀버디 다 규정 담보들 전달라 전담버 장애 수면 랑이 됐다 랑게 세계 주베 낭노점에 장애수
So in this way, the first reason is to actually understand that what we actually consider as enemies and friends only exists from the in one's own deluded mind or from a deluded perspective. From the perspective of a deluded mind or distorted mind, then the appearance of enemies and friends come. Not from the ultimate, not because they truly exist in the ultimate sense.
다 니바디 다다니 시 다다 덴디 더블 수야 다다 란디 들로베 다다니 시 다다 데 인시데 덴디로 제 수는야 디 자니도 주나 수가 따르베 다다 덴디 제 수가 나시 자니도 주나 아니 자니 소소를 묘미도 내고 자다니 시 juwa mebar chine kubris. Kubala teta memba kibun jingi lochung kub kuala nyeba mebe kubsu pani puni mani chumanis. Tati ana shinche pati pula juya mati chumala juya tena rangi padi, rangi chumali juya, na rangi puli juya, rangi mati, rangi chumali juya. O tina shi, tanyi nyebuti, metimba, tanyi nyeba mebe chu nam samna, o ta tanyi nyeba mebe chu samne, tanyi shi zinta, tambur sundi tordun mebatan tadi tanya seyadi cedula rangi chache cemele rangi nyendu jubayari ko tanya nyebuti temba tata ji yuyuna ne cedula tadi chachi yinba cedula di mayinba cedula tadi cemegi nyen di cedula chache 아니 주주 충주지 날에 니만 가시는 잘하지 니만 가시는 년도 제메 그거를 제 내가 열어 제서 내봤잖아 매봐 니만 가시래 내봐 아니 지 어디 인상 never is a Chinese here. Then the Chinese here, Susul server of Michigan. The Susul unit, you are never in a good Amaris. Daddy Yan, you are Yan the Dalek, you did in good Mataba. Yeah, Nimakashi within the Kundu Mabush. Charging, yeah. Niman Kashi in your charges, Suzir within nature. Nimakashi 아니야 년도 주네 제메버버 지역 딘데 내주야라 봐 어째서네 딘데 내주 삼네 단위 내바 매버 추 주에 추남 삼네 아니 단위시 진짜 담보로 손도 돌네 집에 되메버 당스 어떻게
So then the second reason that there is no, in the ultimate sense, true lasting friends and enemies is to actually understand and think that if just as one think or cling to the idea that there are everlasting, true lasting friends and enemies, then if that's the case, it should remain like that. That the fact that the situation does not remain like that forever, that it changes, it points to the fact that from in the ultimate sense there are no true lasting friends and true lasting enemies. And just as during the meditations on person of middle scope, practices pertaining to the person of middle scope, when we think about how there is no certainty within samsaric life as to one's enemies and friends and so forth, we usually give this example of how one's own father in this life could take rebirth as one's own son, or how one's own mother, how one's own wife could take rebirth as one's mother and so forth. That there is no certainty, very much like that, or in the same kind of light, that there are no certainty with respect to friends and enemies within samsara, and not let alone within samsara, but even in this lifetime there is no certainty. People who are one's own enemies and in this life, in the earlier part of life, can become one's friends. And in fact, the situation of friends and enemy can actually change from day to day. One day someone could be your worst enemy, and the next day, because of some factor, you can become friends, inseparable friends. We have like situations like that. So therefore, to actually understand that our idea that there are, in the ultimate sense, true lasting friends is simply creation of our own mind, mentally imputed, mentally created. But that this is not really the case, as we see through these examples. And so therefore, because of that, to actually understand that, to actually cling to the idea of having permanent friends and enemies, and to stick to this idea, is pointless. It has no logical basis.
다 주제 somebody lepile. 다다 생이 때버디. 파르 줄이 지시노스. lepile. 다다 생세야 파르도 줄이세요. 파르 줄이 지시노스. 파르그리스 세다. 베나리지 파리스 줄이 생이유나. 아니 데데도 그 가족들 파리를 되어봐. mit 피레치 리파주 파리테 데데 띵은 그리디야. 파르세 파르데. 근데 디나시 니 다다 신세야 뒤뜨버디 뒤두리스. 다니 셰다 다니 랑기 마루나 다시에 지게 라니 랑원에 마루베서 가라 뜨티 신두두 시바다레 달루다 통루 지기 개바 잠디스 베나 미치레 다니니기 통루 수술 기바당스 미치기 다니 베나 미치글라스다 미치제 미치들의 그게 년그 조직제 자기 조직이나 미치디 지기야 붙은 거리 이동을 했던 거 지기 이동을 했던 거 그 다저기 제브를 미치를 봐. 그 다저기 민이들이 지기야 붙은 지도 붙은 거리 디 문에 두베나 아니 미치부디야 보인 또 보인서 그러. 그러니 이 통주 미치려야 간이기 미치지. 내가 이 미치 미치부디 지기야 그러시던 거지 또 그러시던 거. 어디 그런 걸로 온 게 제발에 미슈지 유 그런 문에 그 답은 실 주고요나 아니 야보이 또 보인스 있어 그러. 이 이상 미치라 장인이 통로에 수술 중 왔당 파리출이 편질 때네 따바장 마도 된담번 마도 타지도 미술이 차단 돌린 미리바 주제수 다 타지도 배 자르수네 당하다 타지도 년도 수네 차바 지역이 돈에 지리민도 상관.
So then the third reason from the ultimate point of view as to why there is no basis in discrimination and why there is no basis in actually holding steadfastly to the idea that there are true lasting friends and true lasting enemies is just like our idea of mountain on this side and the mountain on the other side. The existence or the idea of the mountain on this side and the mountain on the other side is relational. If you are on this side of the mountain, then to you right now this is the mountain on this side and the other side is the mountain on the other side. But if you go to the other side, then it changes. Then that is the mountain on your side, and now the earlier this side of the mountain becomes the other side of the mountain. It's mountain on the other side, right? So therefore, because of the fact that every phenomena, everything in the universe is relational, that there are no independently existing things, that we have to understand that the idea of fixed friends and enemies, an idea of there being true friends and enemies, and there to engage in this steadfast and lasting discrimination with craving and aversion is mistaken. Another example is if there is one individual, one person, and that person is one person, and on the other side there are two individuals. One of them actually considered this person A as one's friend, the other considered the person A as one's enemies, right? But if it is the case that there is a true enemy and there is a true friend, then both of them should either see this individual A as either enemies or friend. But just because we see that one sees individual A as person and the other see the individual person A as an enemy, the other as friend, actually points to the fact that from the side of the object, there are no true friends or true enemies, but it is dependent on the perspective, which is like mental imputation or mental perspective of the person. So from that point of view, also we have to understand the pointlessness of engaging in discrimination. So these are the three evidences from the ultimate point of view as to why we have to engage in equanimity. So these are the 9 reasons.
Thanks, Warren.
Okay, so one more question and we can stop.
I have a question.
Yes.
Then why bother? If that's the case, and those people in this room understand that that's the case, why bother with all this practical compassion? Why bother if we know that it's all perspective? How can we really help others if we can't even construe, because of our own misconceptions, what their problems may be? Isn't it dangerous then to be trying to exert compassion toward others when it's a judgment on our own part as to what the problem is?
Yes. Yes. Can you rephrase it a little bit?
Why bother?
Yeah,
Why
yeah,
bother
yeah.
with all this? Why bother with all this on a relative level if ultimately it's all a question of what we understand to be a perspective? Is it because others don't get that? And that our obligation then is to make that clear to them? But beyond that, is there anything more?
Right.
Is it a Zen question? Have I stumped you?
It's a little Zen, but I'll try. Because it's really like little like Western and Buddhist, in terms of translation. So but I'll try. According to this word, that kunzok gi ngola swa, that kaguji manasta. Jikane dember to begi style yamare dember to begi ne yamare ani tajo jires tongjo jires kanju jik tyoni jik shasha ores ta dinde gi ge shawa ina ta di tan tambe ge tone de dinde da wena ba ta judo kharchi orlo da tandam go de yomara da tandam go yomara tan tambe go de dobe mara ke 대르랑 루르도 거야. 저도 개치고는 아주 랭게 가르쳐. 디네 군족 기내로 힘받이 내로 많이 받도게 되더라. 뭐도게 되더라. 캐나도 네 레스라이디 랭게도 그래. 그 담배게 몰라야. 담배도 베기 때문에 하고 싶으면은 직 소소를 딱 뭐점 통조 점 지금이나 사실 얘가 책으로 통고도 있을 것이나. 아니 아니 치고 인제면다.
지단 야말 그래서 내시게 야말이스 르 따바zam기 자자더니 네나 대 담바 내시게 따다 요함에 전에 되게 같이 야말이스 대 담바 두스는 자디 제베는 자디 요함에 대대니지 년디 비야메 년디 요함에 자지 비메지 요선다 아니 그 당연히 부티다 전담바 내버려 전담바 요함에 전에 두나 얘는 소주 가게 야말이 소주 제야 야말이 아니 상기 유고한다 심제기 동네 심이 템바 투바이나 동네 동네 대대로 지체 부비야 티 야말이 저선 동네디 탑시를 때는 동네 매로 수야 템바 매베 이레스 템바 매베 예산에 동네 세 상기 유고 비야야 자니엘 비야야 니 자르 비야야 다 템바게 자지 요스는 디디스네 부그레스 제사 지다 야레스 르 파타바선기 자다 니 Yes, yeah,
So, of course, this is a very delicate philosophical position that we have to be able to actually understand and then, define the borderline between exactly how it exists, how things exist, and how things do not exist. Otherwise, it can be a cause of confusion. So, in fact, from a Buddhist point of view, if there are ultimately, if there are ultimate things, there are ultimate friends, ultimate enemies, ultimate suffering, then we can. Then there is no point about it. Because we can't do anything, we can't change. Because if there are ultimate friends and ultimate enemies, we cannot change this reality. If there are ultimate sufferings, we cannot change the reality. But because in the ultimate sense, things do not have this permanent, everlasting reality, that because things can be changed by changing the causes and conditions, and in that sense, things do not exist. But it doesn't mean that things do not exist at all. And because of that, we can overcome suffering. We can change kind of causes conditions that give rise to suffering and get rid of suffering, and and therefore we can gain the state of enlightenment. And these are all, from a Buddhist point of view, reason to actually show that from the ultimate point of view, things do not exist everlastingly, truly in that sense. That things are produced by many causes and conditions, and one of them is your own mental imputation. So the borderline again is to actually be able to actually possess that there are enemies, that there are friends. We don't deny it. That there are suffering. People suffer, but that because these are all constantly produced. That when we say they don't exist from the ultimate point of view, we say that they are constantly produced. Therefore, they do not exist in an eternal sense, so that we cannot change it. And that basically, gives us the cause for compassion. That we can change people's situation, we can change people's state of mind, and so forth. Because any kind of state of mind, including suffering, does not truly exist in that sense, because they can be changed.
Hama Senje Tamje Veda